issue that will persist unless our elected leaders enact targeted solutions. And if not, we will be back here again 10 years from now, asking the same question yet again. I leave this committee with one final reminder that your decisions here have tangible impacts in all of our lives. Think of the 350,000 people killed by guns since the Sandy Hook shooting, a grimly disproportionate number of whom were Black men and victims of suicide. Think of the jarring fact that the leading cause of death in America right now for the first time in our history is firearms. What I will think about is my wedding day. When the most significant day of my life, there was an empty chair that my mom should have been in. I'll think about all the times I wanted to pick up the phone, tell her a story, or hear her laugh. I'll think about how she's never held her grandchildren. And I'll think about all the families this year. I'll think about all the families that will have to live through Christmas without their child. That will have to live through Christmas without their child. And the inevitability of those who will join our club, unless representatives here, unless representatives action to take the requisite action to prevent it. I sincerely thank the committee. For this opportunity. I look forward to your questions.
Still getting this fucking echo. What's up, Waffles? I'm not getting sound. They got. Unless they're not broadcasting right now. Where is the sound?
Not present the first 2 weeks. So I kind of took charge and was having to talk to family, friends, having to talk to news media, and having to ask for our own privacy. You never think that you have to actually ask for your own privacy when you lose a loved one. But during a time like this, we did. And it was we were basically having to navigate our own grief that was a public issue.
How deep was the pain?
Barnaby, what's up, brother?
I lost my other half.
Morning.
I lost my person. My parents lost their youngest kid. I mean, how do you not look at us or the other families of mass shootings and not feel for us?
Do you think it was a kid that didn't behave that killed your sister, or was it an assault weapon that killed your sister?
I believe mental health played an issue, right? But when we make it accessible for people with mental health problems to get these weapons,
Might have to do this a couple
we're
different ways,
failing
guys.
America. And you failed my sister.
Thank you. Dr. Guerrero, pediatrician has a happy job with happy faces from birth as you watch them grow up. I'm just gonna have to ask you have clinical experience. How bad were the wounds? I need you to describe how bad were the wounds that you saw. I want everybody to see how many times this scene was repeated in Uvalde, how many times it occurred at Sandy Hook, children, and then we can go across the line from Pulse to El Paso, but in this instances, caskets of children. Could you explain that wound, please, from this type weapon?
Right. So I think it's important for everyone to realize that there was 2 wounds that I saw, because there was only 2 kids that I saw at that point in time that made it to the hospital. Everyone else was dead in the classrooms. But the wounds I did see, as we saw from my previous testimony, a child that I wouldn't have recognized unless I saw pictures from before, from the award ceremony, because this child was headless, ripped apart. The other child had a chest wound so large you could probably put your hand through it. So it's very hard for me to understand when people try to say that these type of weapons cause the same kind of injury as a pistol or any other smaller caliber weapon does. Because I think we know that, or at least I know, that's possibly not even true. Again, I've never seen a kid shot before, but these were devastating injuries that no one could have survived.
Would you say the bodies were mutilated?
Yes.
Would you say that if someone had a pistol that would have equaled what this weapon did to these bodies?
No.
Did you rush in as a first responder really to try and save lives?
No, I was called in just to kind of help in the aftermath, because like I said, there was no one being brought to the hospital that was savable whenever I got there. And I just happened to see these kids in the back that were already deceased. And the kids that survived, shrapnel injuries that were tolerable, that they could get past. But the kids that were directly shot were dead.
Nicole, what are the fears, Ms. Melchiano, that you have even today? You're a high school senior, is that not correct? What are the fears you have today? What do you live with?
When I was younger, I dealt with bad anxieties. I wasn't really able to sleep very well for many years, leading up to almost middle school. I think to this day, the parallels between Sandy Hook and Uvalde just is a big eye-opener to America that we really haven't done anything. And a lot of gun violence in our country is due to systemic racism, it's due to poverty, it's due to homelessness. We know a lot of that is very underrepresented in the media, and the fact that gun violence is the leading cause of death for children is unacceptable and leads everyone, the next generation.
It's not the leading cause of death for
in this
children.
country, to raise a family in this
Jackass.
country.
Jason,
Myself,
what's up,
my
brother?
friends still deal with the trauma from that day, and we're all fighting. Newtown is still fighting 10 years later for change. It's sad that it's been 10 years and I have to sit here in front of you. And turning that trauma into action is not something that is easy to do, but we feel that it's necessary to get anywhere.
Thank you, Nicole. As I finish very quickly, Senator Gutierrez, you have reviewed the reports, watching body cam footage, speaking to the family members when it comes to training our law enforcement officers respond to mass shootings. I just want to get past and get to the heart of it. What the heck happened there, if you could, please?
Chairwoman, it was system failure, it was communication failure, it was cowardice, it was, you name it, any number of things that happened on that day. As I've said before many times, this was the worst response to a mass shooting in our nation's history.
What should the federal government do?
One of the things that pervaded Congresswoman was a federal agent went up to a DPS trooper. Nobody was in charge. Nobody took charge. And one of the federal agents said, I'm waiting on my BORTAC team to get here. When they arrive, and he said, I'm glad to help whatever you need. And then all of a sudden that became, we're waiting on BORTAC. Prior to that, it was, we're waiting on DPS. Prior to that, it was the sheriff. The sheriff says, I wasn't in charge. DPS wasn't in charge. DPS was in charge. DPS says the sheriff was in charge. It all started with the story that this was all, the guy that was supposed to be in charge was the school cop. No one took charge. And the sad part about these types of events is they don't happen in a vacuum. Had this young man not had access to this type of weapon, all of those failures wouldn't have made a difference, but he did. And he waited until his 18th birthday to get them because he had tried and failed prior to that. Unfortunately, in Texas, you can get this type of weapon at the age of 18.
So you're saying he waited till he was 18,
Let me
but you're
thank
saying
you
he wouldn't
for
wait till he was
your
21?
testimony, and as I yield to,
is advising he is in the room full of victims at this moment.
that is from a child in the room. Ms. Biggs, you're now recognized.
Mr. Owens is our first.
You're now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also want to thank the witnesses here today. The violence and senseless murders that occurred in Uvalde, Texas were horrific. As a father of 6 and a grandfather of 16, my heart will always be heavy for those who lost children that day. Following the Uvalde tragedy, my hope was that Congress would examine both the root causes of this violence and ways we can strengthen our communities to make our schools physically safe. Unfortunately, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle put forth a hasty, partisan, and overreaching package of gun control bills that they developed without any Republican input.
They don't want
Today's hearing
Republican
seems to be more
input.
of the same for the Democrats, beating a drum of restricting constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens while ignoring other contributing factors leading to the increase of violence and ignoring common sense solutions that should be bipartisan. For example, in June, I introduced a Secure Our Students Act.
Yeah,
This bill
dude,
would
I'm
have
all for
redirected
arming
billions of
teachers.
dollars of unused and already allocated funds from the American Rescue Plan to each district throughout our country. It would have provided safety based on their customized needs, whether it be hard infrastructure, innovative software, or security personnel. If brought to the floor and passed, it would have guaranteed the conversation we're having today would never happen again. I was disappointed, but not surprised, that the Securing Our Students Act wasn't even considered by my Democratic colleagues. The safety of our children should be, as adults and parents, our #1 priority. In this case, the Democratic majority purposely ignored the solution, keeping our children today at risk, all to their religious zeal and priorities for gun control. Another bill that should have had bipartisan support was the Luke and Alex School Safety Act, introduced by Representative Mario Diaz-Balart in February of last year. This bill would have established a clearinghouse, a national database of school safety best practices, which would have been available to schools, law enforcement agencies, institutions of higher learning, and to the public. Again, the Democrats declined to bring this bill to the floor for
We
discussion.
pretty much already got all these clearinghouses
There
for
are
this
root
stuff.
causes that my colleagues on the other side refuse to address, possibly because of their decades of anti-family policies that have gotten us here. I'm grateful to my friend Jack Bauer for joining us today and having the courage to tackle this topic. Jack and I have a lot in common, both proud conservative Black men, both former NFL players, and most importantly, both passionate about shining a light on the plague that's infected our country of sorry, self-centered, and cowardly men who with no shame abandon their children and families. I'm proud to work with Mr. Brewer on HR 1180, a fatherhood initiative that simply states fatherhood is essential to the development of all children, and that the increased involvement of fathers in the home will lead to economic prosperity, educational excellence, and improved social mobility for children across all racial and ethnic groups. With the remainder of my time,
Yeah,
I'd
you
like
look
to
at
give
any of
Mr.
these
Brewer
shooters, man.
an
All of them
opportunity to
come
respond
from
to following
homes that were
questions.
screwed. No
How does the
father.
absence of fathers in the
worth a
home
shit.
contribute to the violent behavior in adolescent males? And what are some of the other contributing factors?
Thank you, Congressman Owens. I serve a number of fatherless kids every day, particularly in the state of Florida, and I also serve in prisons across the country. And so looking in the eye of men who have actually pulled the trigger, firing illegal guns, shooting at each other, killing people, and asking them, not asking myself what I feel and what policies and what changes can be made, but actually asking them why and how.
It's a
How can we actually
state-made
solve
problem,
these
and the
issues
state can't
versus being
fix it.
partisan? Fatherhood is essential. We see it. If we don't do something about this epidemic, if this was anything else, we would have already addressed it as Americans. When you look across and see 18.6 million fatherless kids in our nation, it should make our stomachs hurt. And the fact that every time we look up and see someone do a mass shooting, they never have a strong-handed daddy in their life. At what point are we going to be brave enough to address those root causes? I go to prisons every week. I'll be in another one next week. And so I'm crying out for those guys in the prisons, because at the end of the day, they're growing up in poverty. They're growing up without parents. These kids are hurting. These are Americans. And so if we continue to put billions of dollars into our criminal justice system without putting any money into rehabilitation programs, without putting any money into programs that are going to make sure that our fatherless population have strong men who can mentor them, who can help them academically in school, who can run sports
definitely
programs.
a moral problem. It's a
We have a
social
nation
problem.
in crisis. We're confusing our kids
We don't
with all of
teach
these
respect for
policies
life
that
anymore.
are
We don't teach
anti-family
personal
and
responsibility
anti-God.
anymore.
And so, Mr. Owens, I'll yield back, but I just want to thank you for your bravery. And there's a lot of young boys that look up to the Super Bowl champion that sits in these halls of Congress. And you continue to fight for the real solutions. They're not popular. Trust me, I get bashed. I'll get bashed today for just being here. But I'm okay with that, because the God I serve is much bigger. Congressman Owens, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Barrow, for your leadership, your vision, and for being a voice in the wilderness. Thank you, my friend. I yield back.
Thank you both very much. And as I yield to the chairman of the full committee, we've just passed a one-stop shop that deals with a lot of those issues. Thank you. I yield to the chairman of the
passed
full
nothing
committee.
that deals with those
the
issues.
distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Holt, you've just heard testimony from Mr. Brewer that the causes of our gun violence problem are a lack of fathers, and from Professor Lott that there's no effective difference between an AR-15 and a single-shot a gun. Could you comment on this testimony, please?
In my experience in law enforcement, I think it's a huge difference between the AR-15 assault weapon and
Dude, you're a political
9mm or
appointee.
38
Shut up.
revolver. I think the key is my officer was killed with an assault weapon. Recently, as 2 months ago, I responded to a Detroit police assist where a high-powered pistol with an extended magazine shot an officer and killed him from the balcony of an apartment building. He was lured into this trap. I think it's something to be said for a strong family background. I don't think that is the solution to what we're facing right now with gun violence in the United States.
Of course not. You just want to lock people up.
Thank you very much. In other words, this testimony is with respect to the prevention of gun violence, idiotic, and I agree with you on that. Mr.
Lord.
Hayne,
There's no way. If
this year we were able to make some progress on gun violence with the passage of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Yet there's still much more to be done to prevent gun violence. As this legislation gets implemented, how will it make our community safer? And what will happen if we don't take additional actions to build on the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, such as the legislation that passed in this House, but not in the Senate?
Yeah, thank you so much, Chairman Nadler, for the question. And the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act is a really important step. I would say a number of policies and a package that undoubtedly is going to save lives, but it's not going to solve gun violence overnight.
Won't save a single
I would actually mention the fact that the universal background check, something that 90% of Americans support, what would serve as a foundation for all gun laws to function, was off the table during that negotiation. So while we were incredibly excited about things like addressing the dating partner loophole, the historic funding for extreme risk law implementation, funding for community violence intervention programs, which addresses a lot of the root causes that we're talking about, community investments in order to address the cycles of gun violence, all of that stuff is going to have tangible impacts in communities. But we do have a lot more to do to address gun violence in all of its forms.
Yes, Slater,
this committee has done an incredible
Nadler's
job of putting some
probably
of those
wearing a
solutions
big old Huggy right now.
Thank you. Chief Holt, unarmed bystanders disarmed the shooter at Club Q in Colorado Springs, and law enforcement was on the scene within minutes, yet 5 lives were still lost. What does this say about the limitations of law enforcement when we allow assault weapons
Do
in our
you
communities?
not know what could go on with
I
a
think the
pump
issue to
action
respond to that
shotgun?
question, and I'm going to respond to it as how we train and how we respond to something like that. Proper training, preparation, resources usually prevent these sort of incidents or allow you to respond to these sorts of incidents. The incident that happened in Uvalde has been discussed, examined, dissected, and results given.
Yeah, no
I
kidding,
think what
Bernie.
we do when you have an active shooter like that with an assault weapon, we don't stand by. Well, we go in with our training and with the proper resources to neutralize that threat and prevent any more collateral injuries as such that took place there.
Thank you. Ms. Melchiono, when you went through this experience, you were 7 years old. And as you've grown older, there have been other school shootings, Parkland, Santa Fe, Oxford High School, Uvalde. Each of these was a mass shooting on a school campus, 2 of them with assault rifles and high fatalities, just as you experienced. What was it like to hear about these events?
It was definitely re-traumatizing. The parallels between Uvalde really uncovered a lot of trauma that I had experienced in the past. Growing older with these memories that I experienced on December 14th, 2012, they're always in my mind, and as I grow older, processing it over and over again is hard because you think of it in different ways and you understand it in different ways, and it makes you question why we keep allowing this in our country and we don't take any action. And Parkland, I think,
You want to know why they don't
was one
take
of the
action,
first
little girl?
times when I
Because
really
they want you to be an unarmed victim
questioned
because they're after the
why
guns,
we
not solving
choose to
the
live
issue.
like this in our country. We know that a lot of these shooters are obtaining these AR-15s and their guns legally, and we need to implement change to make it harder.
Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. As I yield to Mr. Stuvey for his time, I want to thank all the members that have come to this hearing and recognize the gravity of this issue. Thank you. Mr. Stuvey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Holt, isn't it true
Corey,
that the
because
functionality
pretty
of a
much all
semi-automatic
members of
handgun
Congress
is
are a
exactly
giant
identical to the functionality of a semi-automatic rifle?
That is true.
So you would actually agree with Mr. Lott's statement that was earlier and mischaracterized by the chair that a semi-automatic handgun, regardless of the caliber, 9mm, 40, we don't have to get, I mean, we could do that argument for hours. Regardless of the caliber, a semi-automatic handgun operates every time you depress the trigger, a round comes out, functions exactly identical to a semi-automatic rifle.
Well, I don't agree with part, but what I don't agree with.
All I'm asking is a semi-automatic rifle, every time you pull the trigger, a round comes out, correct?
The same as a revolver, yes.
Thank you. So you agree with the way that Mr. Lott characterized that? I've been
No, I
an
don't.
elected, I'm sorry?
No, I do not agree with. I think what he was
No, a
characterizing.
semi-automatic rifle and a semi-automatic handgun function exactly the same. Every time you depress the trigger, a round comes out of the chamber. Is that correct?
As well as a revolver and
Thank
a
you.
single shotgun.
Thank you. So I've been in elected leadership for 12 years. And when I first got elected in 2010 in the state house, Sandy Hook happened shortly after I was in the state house. And being a former military guy who served in a deployed environment and want to find solutions to problems, I started doing research like a good lawyer does. And I saw that in Florida at the time, all of these shootings that were occurring nationwide were happening in gun-free zones, especially in schools, where you have those perpetrators who want to go in and kill as many defenseless children as possible are going to go to a place where they know that people aren't armed. And at the time in Florida, we didn't have school resource officers in every single one of our elementary schools. So I filed a bill that would do away with gun-free zones specifically in our schools and develop a policy and a program. I actually worked with Sheriff Demings, Val Demings' husband, on this with the Sheriff Association, where we would have certified law enforcement officers concealed carry permits that would go through a specific gun safety, school safety course, just like the SROs go through, and put those individuals in our school, former current military, former current law enforcement, that would go through a training course that would be able to respond to these type of incidents. Because what Mr. Lott's research has shown, and this is from his, this is today, 94% of mass shootings between 1950 and 2019 occurred in gun-free zones. That is a fact. Sandy Hook's a gun-free zone. Pulse nightclub was a gun-free zone. Parkland was a gun-free zone. The FSU shooting that we had in Florida was a gun-free zone, and Uvalde was a gun-free zone. And regardless of, we will never get evil people out of this world. And regardless of what tool they're using to accomplish the evil they intend on accomplishing, by not having somebody there who is properly trained, who is armed to be able to respond to these type of atrocities, is what is putting all of our children in these horrible situations. And I fought hard to get that changed in Florida. And I believe if that bill would have been passed before Parkland, those kids in Parkland would have been saved, because that shooter would know that if he was going to that school, there's going to be armed, trained people on the other side that could respond to that. So I want to thank, and I'll yield the remainder of time to Mr. Lott to comment specifically on the gun-free zones, and through acts of Congress.
Hey, our guns, what's up, brother man?
To make gun-free zones a target for these perpetrators who know that when they walk into a school grounds, there's not going to be anybody there that's going to be able to respond in a timely manner. And in Florida, and in my district, average response times 2 to 4 minutes, depending on where law enforcement is. And we all know how quickly the travesties of this evil can occur in such a short period of time by not having somebody armed and trained and able to respond. Mr. Lott, I'll yield the remainder of my time to you.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I mean, you can just read the diaries and manifestos that these killers leave behind. They make it very clear. They're not stupid. Their goal is to go and kill as many people as possible. And they know if they go to a place where victims can't defend themselves, they're going to be able to go and kill more people. We looked at all school shootings of every type, from an accidental discharge all the way up to a mass public school shooting from 2000 on. There are 20 states that have armed teachers. It varies the percentage of schools in different states, but you're talking about literally thousands of schools. And yet in that entire time, there has never been one single attack where anybody's been killed or injured during any school hours where teachers and staff are able to carry. Every single one of these attacks where anybody's been injured or killed have occurred in schools where guns are banned. And you know, would you rather have a sign in front of the school that says this school is a gun-free zone? Or would you rather have a sign in front of the school that warns potential attackers that someone that they can't identify beforehand is going to be able to possibly stop them? You know, having one officer in a school in uniform, they have an almost impossible job. It's like putting somebody there with a neon sign that says, "Shoot me first," if there's going to be an attack. Because they know if they take out the one person in uniform, they're going to have free reign to go after other people that are there. Just read the manifestos, read the diaries. These guys go in extreme detail into explaining why they pick the targets that they do. They're not stupid. Their goal is to get media attention, and they know the more people they kill, the more attention they're going to get.
Thank you for being here.
But see, these fucks, they're going to blow him off.
Gentleman yields back.
You know, don't listen to the guy who actually studies this.
In Sandy Hook, 25,000 children have died by gun violence, which evidences that wherever we are, they're making schools a combat zone. Armed persons.
All those 25,000 didn't die in schools.
Let me yield 5 minutes.
And you're counting people up to 20-something years of age who are out gangbanging and shooting each other.
I thank you, Madam Chair. I thank you to you and to our chairman of the full committee for always focusing on the issue of gun violence and for wanting to make a difference. And finally, this year, making a very small difference. But I thank more the testifiers in front of us. For those who have lost so much, families from Uvalde, Sandy Hook, in neighborhoods around this country, I thank you so much. I always start with the notion of what John Donne said so many centuries ago. Don't ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. It tolls for every single one of us every time a family member is struck down by violence. And while I so value what you have said to us, I'm actually going to ask you to reflect back to me what you're hearing here today. In the face of such loss, in the face of something that is man-made and therefore could be man-solved, you are hearing that the
government has no grounds to do it
across this country, like no other industrialized country suffers, is evil. It's mental illness. We need more paddles and prayers. There's too many single moms raising children.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Do we have greater evil here? Do we have greater mental illness here?
Yes.
Do we struggle with families and holding families together, and proud mothers and fathers who raise children sometimes as single parents? Really? We heard testimony of a headless child. We're going to talk about paddles and prayers might solve this problem.
A child's head off.
Where have we lost our humanity? Early on in this testimony, you heard from the ranking member, his focus, his worry is that we are trying to emasculate the Second Amendment. My, oh my, to deprive a man of his male role or identity. May not anyone's masculinity be connected to slaughter of children in our country.
That's a fucked
And so
up
I
statement,
ask you respectfully, please know I respect all of you. When you hear this set of arguments, can you reflect back to me how we bridge the divide, how we really want to work this Congress and next Congress with members across the aisle?
Yeah, Corey, it is,
to find the love and the humanity to find solutions to this man-made problem. So Faith, may I begin with you? When you hear this set of arguments, what do you think?
I think it just upsets me because it shouldn't be between two parties. It should be the fact that Americans are dying every day, children in America are dying, and you're arguing over the fact of, well, if we take away this gun, we're taking away our Second Amendment laws. That's not the issue. The issue is your people are dying, you were the leaders, and you aren't doing anything about it.
Thank you. Dr. Guerrero, what do you think?
I think it's disturbing on my end because as a pediatrician,
Safe line, what's
you
up,
also
brother?
see the parenting side of these kids in your clinic every day. And I have plenty of kids that suffer from mental illness that end up being in institutions, that end up as bad kids that
Warsaw,
have
what's
great
happening, man?
parents, both
I
mom
saw
and
you over
dad,
in Ghost Stream.
day in, day out. And the parents are at wit's end saying, I don't know what the hell to do with this kid. And it's not that I did anything wrong or didn't raise him correctly. What is, just is, right? And as I mentioned earlier, with the shootings at
Dude,
Pulse,
Warsaw, I don't know whether I will or not. Depends on what I got going on.
El Paso, I want to focus on that on this side. I'm a proud gay man. I'm a proud Mexican American. I'm also a proud Uvaldean. So all three of these tragedies angle in at me at some root. So don't sit here and tell me it's because this kid wasn't raised right or because they were suicidal, went through depression, didn't have a therapist.
Murderers,
Yeah, maybe that all has a part of it. But every single one of these people, every single one of these monsters had access to this type of weapon.
And in the remaining time, I thank you. Senator Gutierrez, I'm joined here today by my friend, Representative Matt Bradford from the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. He's our Democratic leader in the House. I served with him there. We formed the PA Safe Caucus after Sandy Hook 10 years ago. We heard these same arguments. What's your reaction when you hear this
Warsaw, I haven't checked it out yet,
ridiculous
man.
clash of arguments?
Congresswoman, it's outrageous. I mean,
Just
at
had a
the end
lot
of the
of stuff
day, an
going on
18-year-old accessed a militarized weapon on his 18th birthday, and then again on the next day, and then again the next day. The fact is, 18 states have age limits. You passed a bill in the House with an age limit to 21, and the Senate compromised bipartisan bill stripped that out. The fact is, if America saw how this young man accessed these weapons, you would be disturbed and disgusted about an 18-year-old going in to buy these types of weapons. 75% of Republicans want age limit increase.
No,
Your constituents
we don't.
want an age limit increase to 21. You know, Jesus Christ, he was a fixer. He wasn't a prayer. There's only one time in the Bible he said ain't to pray, and that was the day before he was arrested. He said, let's pray. The fact is, he fixed things. He did things. He said, let's do something. Let's be kind to immigrants. Let's save kids. Let's protect kids. He was a doer. You're doers. You're fixers. That's what people elected you to do.
Do nothing.
And now it's time to do something. Not to do something for the moneyed interest.
And
We all know about the money in this room, and we know all about the gun lobby in this room. Bloomberg. And that's the truth.
And I pray that in this upcoming Congress, we will find the power to work together to solve this problem, because 97% of gun owners want us to solve this problem.
No, we
I yield
don't.
back.
You
I
guys
thank the gentlelady.
created
That
the
is the
problem.
cause and reason of this hearing, and I look forward to that work and yield to Judge Gohmert.
Thank you. And I do have great sympathy for the victims, families represented here. As a former felony judge, I've seen the worst of the worst. And anyway, heart goes out to you. The issue here is what to do about it. But Mr. Lott, do you have any statistics on what percentage of Americans want to see limitations on gun rights?
Yes, thank you very much. A lot of the surveys that have been mentioned so far, I think, are pretty misleading. So earlier it was mentioned about support for red flag laws, for example. And if you look at surveys, they'll go and say by 2-to-1 Americans support red flag laws.
Ozzy, what's
The
happening?
problem is the way the questions are asked in all these things makes a huge difference. So for example, for red flag laws, they'll say, do you support judges being able to temporarily take away a person's guns who is a danger to themselves or others? Most people think that's reasonable. The problem is,
Well, actually, most places, that's the law.
right, yeah, I understand. I mean, it's already the law even without red flag laws, because you have involuntary commitment and other types of laws. But the point is that if you merely tell them two things about red flag laws, that one, that there's no hearing that occurs before the judge takes away the weapons, and that there are no mental health care professionals involved in the process, unlike involuntary commitment, you end up going from 2-to-1 support to almost 2-to-1 opposition. Take something like,
Thank you. I just wanted to touch on that, but
Sure.
This is such a critical issue. And
see, these jokers, they will
Brewer,
blow
I
off
appreciate your
everything
work.
that Locke
I've seen
says.
it over and over in our prisons in Texas. The least recidivist rates occur where there has been Christian mentoring and follow-up, and it's been amazing. But unfortunately, a lot of places ban that. You mentioned about the high percentage of fatherless children that are involved in these kind of violent attacks. But it goes deeper than that, and I know you agree with me. Going back to John Adams, who said, "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge, gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution is designed only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for any other." And that's what it comes down to. More than just fatherlessness, we have started teaching children that there's no absolute right and wrong. What feels good is probably okay. We've got schools that are grooming children to be what our current laws say is sexual assault of a child, and it's going on publicly. Our morality as biblical Judeo-Christian morality has gone out the window. So that is the common thread that I've seen, and I agree with the people here. But to this extent, if we're not going to get back to teaching morality, Judeo-Christian principles on which we were founded, as Alexis de Tocqueville said, wow, this is amazing. He said, in Europe, religion, Christianity, and freedom go two different directions. In the United States, they're inextricably woven together. We got to get back to teaching there is a right or wrong, or I agree with everybody here. We're going to have to get rid of the Second Amendment. We're going to have to get rid of freedom of speech. We're going to have to get rid of freedom of assembly. This Constitution won't work the way we are teaching children. And I'd give you the rest of my time to elaborate on that.
Thank you, Mr. Gomer. I mean, I have been working on these issues with my hands for a long time. My question is, how many of the folks behind that in Congress have actually been in the prisons actively and going to the inner cities actively? So for me to be called, my idea is to be called idiocy and to be made a mockery of in front of the nation. You know, I know that I'm taking that persecution in the name of Jesus, because I hear a lot of flesh talk. I don't hear any spirit talk. Spirit talk says that we cannot solve things of the flesh with the flesh. The things of the spirit must come in. When you pull a trigger and mass shoot somebody, you are spiritually weak. And for us to sit here as we look and see that 82% of people that commit mass shootings are fatherless, to not look at that as a root cause, to me, is idiocy. And so when we start talking about our kids, look at what's happening in our public schools. A lot of our public schools kids are reading 3 and 4 grade levels below their proficiency. They don't have dads at home to hold them accountable. And so to say that that doesn't play in to why we have so much gun violence in our streets makes no sense. Go into the prisons and talk to the people who are pulling the trigger. I am here speaking for them because I serve them every day. And the reason, the only way that they rehab is through the word of God. We don't teach God in our schools anymore. We don't even teach the 10 commandments. Most kids don't even know the 10 commandments. And so they don't have a fear of God. If you don't have a fear of God, there is no way that you are going to be able to go into a society and promote any type of righteousness. We are morally weak as a nation right now. And I think we put that front and center for the American people to see that we have certain people in our government that do not want to stand up for the word of God. That is called the Antichrist, and I yield back, Mr. Gomer.
Thank you. My time's expired.
Now, what Gomer was saying is the
Ladies and
Constitution
gentlemen,
can't
we have
deal with
votes on the
issues
floor
like
of the
this.
House. I know that gentlelady from Pennsylvania was poised, but we're at a point now we think that we would start the gentlelady at the opening back after votes.
Okay, whatever you need.
We would appreciate your graciousness. So at this point in time, to the ranking member, the committee now stands in recess. The witnesses will return at the call of the chair, and they will be notified by respective staff. Again, thank the witnesses very much. The hearing is now only in recess.
All right, so they'll recess. God knows how long it'll take them on these other votes and crap that they got to do.
So today, the subcommittee turns once again.
Stuff play. Well, all these people, man, and those of us who actually pay attention to a lot of what these cats are doing, we all know they're full of crap. We all know they're always going to be full of crap. They're about power and money and more power. So no matter what they have to do to get those things, they're going to do it. When they say that fatherless homes and stuff aren't the issue, well, go look at back when you could actually see that the nuclear family was extremely strong, and look at the number of mass shootings versus now when the nuclear family is very weak comparatively, and look at the number of mass shootings. These weapons that are being used are the same thing. They're the same exact freaking guns with very few cosmetic changes. So why weren't there all these mass shootings when you get a machine gun mailed to your doorstep?
The subject of gun violence, examining this ongoing crisis by focusing on one of the most terrible tragedies our nation's history. The murder of 21 people, 19 of them children, on May 24, 2022, at the hands of an 18-year-old armed with an AR-15 style rifle at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. That school still stands. In September, Representative Julian Castro and I held a hearing in Uvalde where they listened to parents of victims, citizens, and Arnulfo Reyes, a teacher in room 111. Mr. Reyes told us that he did not realize what was happening until he saw the bullets breaking sheetrock off the walls. He saw the shooter's shadow and the sparks coming from the gun as he fired into his classroom, hitting him and then his students. No notice, gunfire. As Mr. Reyes lay on the floor for some 77 minutes, the shooter sat at his desk and taunted him. He poured water on him. He smeared Mr. Reyes' own blood onto his face, then shot him in the back to make sure he was dead. Fortunately, Mr. Reyes survived. When he got the call that morning, Julio Cazares rushed to the school, a parent. While he and other parents begged officers to rush in, he could hear shots being fired inside. As officers began to bring children out of windows, Julio hoped to see his daughter Jacqueline emerge from one of those windows. Sadly, he did not see her. Instead, he later saw his daughter pulled out of an ambulance at the hospital. We now know of the cascade of failures that led to the tragedy at Robb Elementary School. An investigation by a special Texas House Investigative Committee found that systemic failures and egregiously poor decision-making contributed to the loss of life. Gunfire makes no appointment. Gunfire by an automatic weapon, a weapon of war, never stops. Despite the eventual presence of 376 law enforcement officers, not one of them confronted or engaged the shooter after a group of first officers on the scene tried to approach rooms 111 and 1112, were met with gunfire from an AR-15 style rifle. Without an assault weapons ban, more people will die. And if we're not going to ban them, then law enforcement must be trained to confront these weapons of war. Yes, we must train law enforcement like warriors in a battle on the combat field. Gunfire from an AR-15 style rifle turned those armed officers on their heels and left them paralyzed in the hallway for well over an hour. Uvalde Sheriff Ruben Nolasco led a litany of chaos, confusion, and inaction that day. His failures, coupled with the presence of an assault rifle, left very little hope for the children in rooms 111 and 112. Although the officers had information that a child was on the phone with 911, surrounded by dead bodies, Sheriff Nolasco led officers away from the immediate threat instead of ordering them to storm the room and try to save the children. That day, law enforcement's failures of implementation, planning, training, and duty delayed paramedics' ability to reach those who might be saved. We saw the video of parents trying to climb through windows or trying to break through doors. Let me be very clear. This is not a comment on the millions of law enforcement officers who today and days gone by stand ready to serve. who have broken into places to save people, stop burglary, stop murder, save children, jumped into water, and risked their lives. Don't dare suggest that is the comment today. Don't dare. But what we are saying is that we have to be honest, and that babies have died, and parents are mourning. And the federal government has to be the final and ultimate word of responding to the sacrifice of those babies.
Yeah, I kind of forgot to unmute myself when I walked back in. Well, I could hear her talking
and
before.
The parents who mourn.
But yeah, it's the state failed these kids before the shooting because they had contact with this kid. They knew this kid was having issues, talking about Uvalde, just like some other shootings we've seen. They failed them during the shooting because their piss poor response. They could have literally walked to an outside window and shot the dude through the window and took care of that issue. And they failed them after the hearing or after the shooting because then all they want to do is this shit and not actually look at actual issues.
We know for certain that Eva Morales, a teacher in room 112, died in an ambulance, and 3 young students died in local hospitals, including Jacqueline, who died at 1:17 p.m. from gunshot wounds to the chest. We will hear today from Faith Mata, a young woman whose 10-year-old sister, Tess, was murdered that day. Ms. Mata will tell us about the hours she spent waiting, hoping to hear that her sister was among the survivors, only to have officers ask her for her DNA sample in order to identify her sister's body. Law enforcement failed the Mata family and every other family represented at Robb Elementary School that day, including the siblings of Uzziah Garcia, who are so afraid to go to school that they get sick to their stomachs. The victims of the horror, and these are babies, 10-year-olds, that took place in Uvalde were also failed by this country's gun laws. While some states restrict the purchase of long guns, including assault weapons, until the age of 21, Texas and federal law allow those guns to be purchased at age 18. The Uvalde shooter asked multiple people to purchase guns for him before he turned 18, but fortunately, they refused.
So you're saying he waited till he was 18 to get the gun for himself. So there's no possibility he could have waited till he was 21 at all? No possibility?
As soon as he was old enough to legally buy the guns for himself, again, 18, not 21, he purchased 2 AR-15 style rifles. In less than a week, he amassed more than 2,000 rounds of ammunition, with the bulk of it being delivered to his doorstep. It is important to note that the shooter had already purchased 60 30-round magazines, a holographic sight, a snap-on trigger system in February.
I asked this in Ghost Chat. What is a snap-on trigger? I really want to know what a snap-on trigger is.
For his 18th birthday. In some states, the shooter's behavior might have allowed someone to raise a red flag and alert authorities that he might be a danger to others and prevent him from obtaining a firearm, but Texas has no such law. These must be federal laws. Again, a red flag law would have stopped the shooter from obtaining these deadly weapons and saved so many precious lives. And they shouldn't be able to opt in. It should be the federal law. As a country, we banned the sale of assault weapons for 10 years. But when the ban expired, we saw a tripling of number of active shooter incidents, a tripling in the average number of people murdered in active shooter incidents, and the mass shootings, the schools shootings.
Yeah, it very well could be, Oz.
Continue unabated. Yesterday, we observed the 10th anniversary of the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. Nothing has been done. On that horrific day, 20 first graders as young as 6 years old and 6 teachers were lost to gunfire. Like Uvalde, the Sandy Hook shooting was perpetrated by a young man, only 20 years old, armed with an AR-15 style assault weapon, who had killed his mother before going to the school.
Are we going to say, Sheila, that those guns were stored safely, much like your storage laws that you want, and that is why the kid killed his mom, to gain access to the guns? We're going to talk about any of that? We're going to talk about the fact that this kid was known to have some very serious issues, that he should have been civilly committed already? No, we just want to talk about the gun, as always. Even though I've got a few of them sitting around here right now, and not a one of them's looking at me cross-eyed. Okay, maybe that AK is, but...
Today, in memory of that tragedy, we'll also hear from Nicole Melchicciano, a survivor of that massacre. She remembers all too well what it was like as a 7-year-old child to hide in a classroom trembling in fear, thinking that she would never see her family again as the crack of gunfire echoed the halls of her school. Nicole still bears the scars of her trauma, yet she will come today and bravely tell her story in the hopes that we will take action so that no child will ever endure that again. Democrats in Congress have spent more than 2 decades trying to do something.
Now look at the picture, because that's part of the Uvalde shit. Look at the picture where all those cops, the one behind Val Demings, where the cops were looking through the window, where they could have engaged that shooter very early on and saved a lot of lives if they had shot him through the window.
Anything to stop the violence and end the bloodshed. We hope the Republicans will join us, but they oppose us at every turn. During this Congress alone, Democrats have put forward numerous policy proposals to prevent losses of life like those in Uvalde, Buffalo, Sandy Hook, Tree of Life, El Paso, Las Vegas, and the Pulse nightclub, among others. Through this committee, we have supported raising the age of firearms, extreme risk protection orders, or red flag laws, or renewed assault weapons ban, restrictions on large capacity magazines. I introduced a simple bill honoring Kimberly Vaughn, Firearms Safety Storage Act. She died at Santa Fe, 14 years old, which would have encouraged the proper storage of firearms and ammunition. Democrats also put forth numerous bills to invest in the fund law enforcement, including bills that would provide better training and targeted resources, coordinate the creation of an active shooter alert, and ensure better communication and trust between our law enforcement and the communities they serve. Led by our chairman, Chairman Nadler, we've worked every single day. But bill after bill, policy after policy, our friends, Republican colleagues, oppose our efforts to keep our communities safer. They've repeatedly opposed legislation that could prevent violence, and they have opposed investments in effective law enforcement. And while rejecting and distorting our common sense proposals, Republicans have offered no credible policy solutions of their own. We hope today.
Because federal policies and federal laws are only supposed to govern federal matters. It's the reason that all of you guys' gun control is based on the Interstate Commerce Clause, a bastardization of the Interstate Commerce Clause. So you can get your sneaky backdoor way into control guns.
As the meeting says, that we can develop a bipartisan approach. As a result of these lax gun laws and underinvestments in law enforcement have led to higher rates in red states, have had spillover effects across the.
Now, Corey mentioned something, right there about his father's rights and things like that. And we heard in the hearing about fatherless homes and things of that nature. A lot of these people sitting on the left-hand side of that aisle don't give a damn about fathers or strong fathers or fathers who raise their children or fathers who teach their children respect for life. They don't give a damn about fathers at all because they want the state to be the father. That's where all their policies are geared towards. The state is the authoritarian figure.
Country as guns flow into our communities without restraint. In June, after Uvalde, we were able to enact the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. While the act took a step forward on gun violence prevention, we have so much more to do. Without further action, our communities will continue to suffer losses of life like those in Uvalde, which affect our mental health, our sense of safety and security, and our trust in law enforcement. Just this morning on the news, I heard a citizen in Washington say, as much as they try to work, he's just sick and tired of gun violence. That is why our hearing today is so important. We should all be sick and tired of gun violence and violence by weapons of war. I look forward to hearing from each of our distinguished guests who will speak directly to the issues of gun violence that threaten our nation's safety. I thank our survivor witnesses for their bravery and willingness to share their stories. Without objection, I submit into the record the following documents. Texas House of Representatives Investigative Committee on the Robb Elementary School Shooting Interim Report, the Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training Alert Center's Robb Elementary School Attack Response Assessment and Recommendations. I now recognize the distinguished gentleman from Arizona, the Ranking Member Biggs, for his opening statements. Mr. Biggs, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate this, you holding this hearing today, and appreciate you recognizing me for a few minutes to provide an opening statement. We'll never forget the horror of Uvalde, and those who were victimized will also remain in our hearts and our minds. And as the chair has said, there was a cavalcade of failures on that day. there are many reasons that evil persists and that evil lacks. I welcome our two witnesses today. We have Dr. John Lott Jr., who's an economist, world-recognized expert on guns and crime. He served as the Senior Advisor for Research and Statistics in the Office of Justice Programs and in the Office of Legal Policy in the U.S. Department of Justice, and has held research or teaching positions at various academic institutions, including the University of Chicago, Yale, the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, Stanford, UCLA, and Rice.
Yeah, safe line.
He was
You
the
ain't
chief
wrong.
economist at the U.S. Sentencing Commission during 1988 to 89. He holds a PhD in economics from UCLA. Nobel laureate Milton Friedman noted John Lott has few equals as a perceptive analyst of controversial public policy issues. He's a prolific author for both academic and popular publications and has published over 100 articles in peer-reviewed academic journals and written 10 books, including More Guns, Less Crime. His most recent books are Dumbing Down the Courts and How Politics Keep the Smartest Judges Off the Bench. He's been one of the most productive and cited economists in the world. From 1969 to 2000, he ranked 26th worldwide in terms of quality adjusted total academic journal output and 4th in terms of total research output. Among economics, business, and law professors, his research is currently the 14th most downloaded in the world. I also welcome the Honorable Jack Brewer to be with us today. He is from Fort Worth, Texas, grew up in Grapevine, went on to a successful athletic career both in track and field and in professional football. But beyond that, though, Mr. Brewer is a humanitarian. He's an ordained evangelist who's dedicated his life to initiatives aligning with biblical commandments to serve the fatherless, the poor, the widows, and the captives. That's what his focus is. He will be talking today about the need for families.
Kitty, what's
if we're going
up?
to stop violence of all kinds, in particular gun violence. To date, his foundation has delivered over $70 million in medical aid, supports over 55 orphan care centers, and helped deliver sports equipment to over 1 million underserved children, and helps bring medical care to over 20,000 women and children around the world. I'm delighted to welcome our two witnesses here today. One other thing that our distinguished chairwoman said today is we have to be honest. But despite the title of the hearing today, there hasn't been an honest engagement in search for bipartisan solutions to gun violence, mostly because there's only one solution for my friends across the aisle, that is to emasculate the Second Amendment and remove guns from legal, lawful, and law-abiding citizens. For proof, just look at the bills they've either introduced or brought through the committee in the 117th Congress. For example, they have pushed legislation to infringe upon the rights of law-abiding Americans, such as federally mandating background checks on all firearm transfers, red flag laws, banning certain semi-automatic firearms, extending background check waiting periods, establishing new federal databases, and establishing a national firearm registry. Those proposals, gun law experts have explained, will do nothing to end gun violence or in the criminal use of firearms. They did this while demonstrating a complete lack of respect for and understanding of the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding Americans. Don't take my word for it. Let their own words speak for themselves.
Yeah, well, the system's pretty well rigged, Clint.
A 9mm bullet blows the lung out of the body. So the idea of these high-caliber weapons is there's simply no rational basis for it in terms of self-protection.
This little bullet.
And remember,
this
the Constitution,
9mm.
the Second Amendment, was never absolute. Law enforcement, military, and ballistic experts agree that those claims are pure nonsense. I'm talking about the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding Americans. One of the representatives on this committee stated, quote, "Spare me the bull about constitutional rights," close quote. And that same representative also questioned whether or not someone with a semi-automatic rifle has ever been
Safety
stopped
doc, what's happening, brother?
American with a firearm. Specifically stated, "I don't think there's a single," and I'm quoting here, "I don't think there's a single incident, and maybe there's one, but I've not found one of an assailant using an assault weapon that was stopped by a person with a gun." Literally a month before he made that claim, a woman stopped what law enforcement indicate was likely to be a mass casualty event in West Virginia when she shot a man carrying an AR-15 type rifle with her handgun. There's one example. An example from November 24th, 2022, was that when a 23-year-old woman in a suburb of Chicago, licensed to have a carry concealed permit, shot a man trying to break into her car early in the morning. Just last week, a 56-year-old Chicago man being robbed by 4 suspects on Chicago on the west side turned the tables and shot 3 of the robbers, wounding 2 of them and saving his own life. Democrats aren't interested in searching for the causes of these horrific and tragic acts of violence, which is, as I said, the persistence of evil in the world.
No, not yet, Doc. I'm hoping something will be in soon.
Interested in trampling on the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding Americans. And today we're examining the tragedy in Uvalde. The murderer there was estranged
I'm waiting to
from
do
his
a mail
father
video till I get that in.
Engaged in numerous heated conflicts and arguments with his mother, who was having trouble raising her son. I bring up the shooter only because the shooter in Uvalde is not unique in having a difficult and troubled home life. Dr. Peter Langman, an expert on the psychology of school shooters and other perpetrators of mass violence, examined 56 school shooters and found that, quote, 82% of the sample either grew up in dysfunctional families or without their parents together for at least a significant part of their lives, close quote. Research from Dr. Brad Wilcox, a professor of sociology at the University of Virginia and senior fellow at the Institute for Family Studies, finds that males growing up in single mother homes are nearly twice as likely to end up delinquent compared to males who enjoy good relationships with their fathers. This is not to denigrate single mother homes. Having my own mother grow up in such a home, it is only to talk about the difficulties and the exacerbation of raising a family that goes hand in hand with these difficult situations. How long can we continue to ignore these findings if we're really going to search for bipartisan solutions to put a stop to these tragic, tragic events? My colleagues across the aisle would like to ignore the connection between adolescent males growing up without their fathers and these violent events. And yet studies indicate very clearly there is a significant correlation and probably a causative effect. In fact, during a hearing of this Congress in a plea for new gun control laws, our own chairman stated, quote, a recent study in the American Journal of Medicine found that compared to 29 other high-income countries, the gun-related murder rate in the United States is 25 times higher, even when you adjust for population differences. Americans are disproportionately killed by gun violence.
No, they're not.
One of the critical differences, of course, is that other countries have stronger gun safety laws, close quote. The fact is that this country has numerous gun laws and penalties already in place for those who violate those laws, for those who sell guns, those who distribute guns, those who traffic in guns, and those who use guns illegally for violent purposes. And what the chairman failed to acknowledge is the fact that nearly a quarter of children in the United States live with only one parent. That is also more than any other country on the planet and has a direct correlation to all the violence in our society, including gun violence.
There's no such thing as
gun violence. It is now time
violence.
for us to proceed with this hearing. I'm looking forward to the compelling testimony of all those who are here today, but it's also something, if you're going to look at this testimony, it's important to look at root causes for this violence and not focus solely on taking away Second Amendment constitutionally protected rights. With that, Madam Chair, I'll yield that.
Yeah, when these idiots, when they start talking about this leading cause of death for children these days being gun violence, what they don't tell you is that most of the young people that they're counting in this are people that are involved in drugs and gangs and living a criminal life. And they expand the age, I think, all the way up to like 22 or 23 in some cases to try to pump the numbers up. Man against the masses. What's up, brother man? So they try pumping these numbers up. It's the same reason that they add suicides into so-called gun deaths. They have to pump the numbers up. They have to find a way to make this seem far bigger than what it is, because they don't want to deal with core issues. To them, it's always been about the gun. It's been about the gun for the left in this country since before the ink on our Constitution dried. Wait, where's the sound?
So, deadliest grade school shooting in our nation's history. A history that is littered with far too many school shootings. We'll never forget the 20 children, young children, only 6 or 7 years old, and 6 adults who lost their lives to a 20-year-old young man armed with a semi-automatic assault rifle, a weapon of war. We will not forget the national outcry for change, for meaningful gun legislation that would prevent similar incidents in the future. But for nearly a decade, those cries went unheeded, as Republicans in Congress stymied any attempt at reforming our gun laws. So month after month, year after year, the shootings have continued. San Bernardino.
Now this guy right here, Mr. Humpty Dumpty, he's one who will literally say that groups like Antifa and others who have been causing mass damage and casualties in cities are, well, figments of your imagination. Sheila Jackson Lee the other day, protecting a arms dealer getting released in trade for a basketball player. What did she say? Well, he hasn't killed Americans. The guns he sold has killed Americans. So, it was okay to let him go. These people play this fucking game with your rights, with my rights, with our freedoms, and it's always the state wins and the individual loses. So whatever logic they have to spin, whatever facts they have to distort to push their narrative, that's what they're going to do.
Orlando, Las Vegas, Parkland, Pittsburgh, Thousand Oaks, El Paso, Boulder, and still Congress did nothing. But this past year, we reached a turning point when in the span of 10 days, 31 people were murdered in mass shootings in Buffalo and, of course, in Uvalde. The massacre of 19 school children and 2 adults at Robb Elementary School was a tragedy so horrific that it is difficult to comprehend. From the lax gun laws that allowed the 18-year-old shooter to stockpile military
you're 100%
weapons
right.
and ammunition just days before the shooting, to law enforcement's unfathomable failure to respond quickly and to take all possible actions to save the lives of children, the Uvalde shooting encapsulates so much of what characterizes America's crisis of gun violence. And it is through the lens of the tragedy in Uvalde that we must look for solutions. This committee did just that the week after our earlier hearing, moving the Protecting Our Kids Act, which passed the House on June 8th of this year, with the vast majority of Republicans voting no. The act contained several critical measures to prevent gun violence, including raising the age for buying semi-automatic rifles like those used in Sandy Hook, Buffalo, and Uvalde, establishing new federal offenses for straw purchases of large capacity magazines, safe storage requirements, and statutory bans on bump stocks and ghost guns. Because of continued Republican opposition, the act did not have sufficient support to pass the Senate, despite the cries from the families in Uvalde and throughout the nation. But just a few weeks later, Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate finally were able to come together to pass the bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Though it was not nearly as expansive as our House champion bill, I'm nonetheless proud of what we were able to achieve with the bipartisan Safer Communities Act. The first meaningful gun legislation in decades, the act requires enhanced background checks for firearms purchasers under the age of 21. It creates new federal straw purchasing.
What that act does is it takes someone who's under the age of 21 and it balls up any kind of HIPAA laws or anything like that and throws them dead in the damn trash. And it makes someone who is 18 to 20 a very much second-class citizen, even though they have every other right. They can sign contracts, they can get married, they have everything else.
And trafficking offenses, and it provides critical funding for violence intervention initiatives, children and family mental health services, and school programs, including safety programs. It is a critical first step, but it is only a first step. Experience has shown us that there is still so much more to be done. This committee has tried. Most Republicans have opposed every type of gun legislation we have advanced. Extreme risk protection orders, banning assault weapons, and raising the age to purchase semi-automatic firearms. Each of these measures could have prevented the tragedy in Uvalde.
No, they wouldn't
and
have.
So many others. It is no surprise then that in the few months since Uvalde, we have continued to see more mass shootings. From the July 4th shooting in Highland Park, Illinois, to the Walmart shooting in Chesapeake, Virginia, to the recent massacre at Club Q in Colorado Springs, we have learned that even when police act as swiftly as possible, and even when heroic citizens risk their own lives to stop the bloodshed, there is no act of heroism that can stop an AR-15 assault-style weapon from killing dozens of people within minutes.
Hold on, you little short fat fuck. There was a dude in a food court not too long back who very much did stop someone from using an AR-15 to kill multiple people, but you don't want to hear about that because it's not about the gun and it's not about safety, and it is about control. All the times where people have used ARs, AKs, all these different semi-automatic rifles to defend themselves, family, and others. One was a pregnant woman about 2 or 3 years ago who had multiple assailants jumping on her husband. She got an AR-15 and she saved her husband's life. You guys don't want to talk about that. Never mind the fact that when this woman engaged 3 or more targets with that AR-15, I think she shot 4 of the guys, that actually goes down as a mass shooting, even though it was purely defensive. Let's not talk about stuff like that.
This is a uniquely American problem, and it demands a solution from us, the representatives Americans have chosen to pass laws to protect them while safeguarding their constitutional rights. As Mr. Biggs quoted me as saying, Americans are 25 times as likely to die from gun violence as citizens in other countries. And no one can slander the American people by saying that we are 25 times as mentally ill.
Yeah,
We're focusing today on the tragedy in Uvalde because it highlights so many of the issues that we must address in order to stop the bloodshed. The extraordinary harm caused by assault-style weapons and ammunition, the likely effects of gun safety legislation such as extreme risk protection orders, active shooter alert systems, and raising the age for purchasing semi-automatic weapons, best practices and policies for law enforcement agencies who respond to active shooter situations, how to best protect our youngest and most vulnerable Americans in their schools, and how violence intervention strategies can work with traditional responses to reduce gun violence. I look forward to hearing our witnesses' testimony about these and other issues related to our crisis of gun violence. I thank the witnesses for coming today, and again, I express my gratitude to Chairwoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who has fought so passionately for gun safety legislation, for convening this hearing. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman for his testimony or his statement.
Okay. I have to ask this because it's really, really bothering me. What is on the top of Sheila Jackson Lee's head? Okay.
And I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Madam.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just want to thank all our witnesses for being here today, but in particular, Mr. Lott, who is an expert on firearms and firearm laws, and Mr. Brewer for his work in supporting the institution of the family. You know, the first institution the good Lord put together wasn't the church, it wasn't the state, it was moms and dads and kids. And the strength of that institution ultimately, I think, determines the strength of our culture, our society, and our great country. So we appreciate all our witnesses, but in particular, the two Republican witnesses. And with that, I would yield back and look forward to the testimony.
See,
it is.
Hey, pause this for a second. So, see, why is it, and I was at work yesterday and I couldn't cover any of the hearing they had yesterday over the Q nightclub shooting, which pushed oh God, I can't even keep up with the amount of bullshit they pushed in that hearing. Knowing we're running in kind of this lame duck setting right now, why the full-on push that they're going through right now for more gun control? And I submit to you, some of that full-on push is because they are still going to get shit passed, whether it is in omnibus bills or whether you have more Republicans cross the line and actually vote with these idiots. All right, safety doc. Yeah. Dude, I check the mail, man, every day. I'm looking for it. And then I can shoot my mail video I want to shoot. To be honest with some of you guys, man, or hell with all you guys, about the last week or so, some of you probably noticed I hadn't been around all that much. I might pop into something and, like Darkstream, I might buy some memberships or something for somebody. Been on a little bit of a hiatus just because I needed to just take a break from listening to crap like this. And, well, this week with two of these hearings going on, that's kind of got me back and running. So we'll see how everything else goes.
It's now my pleasure, with a sense of sadness, to introduce today's witnesses. First, Faith Mata is the big sister of Tess Mata, one of the 21 lives lost at Robb Elementary School in May of this year. She's joined by her parents, Jerry, an aviation mechanic, and Veronica, a kindergarten teacher. I'd like for them to stand with their baby Tess. Faith is a senior at Texas State University, where she is pursuing a degree in psychology. Thank you, family. Dr. Ray Guerrero is a board-certified pediatric specialist who was born and raised in Uvalde and attended Robb Elementary School. He treated several of the victims on that day, that terrible day. Dr. Guerrero is their doctor. He is the children's doctor. And he saw these children over and over again. Dr. Guerrero has over 16 years of experience in medicine, including serving as chairman of pediatrics at Uvalde Regional Medical Center, assistant professor of pediatrics at Baylor College of Medicine, and serving as the medical director and CEO of Encina Pediatrics and Primary Care. He didn't sleep for days as he was working with families. Can you imagine his pain? Thank you, doctor. Thank you, Faith, for being here. The Honorable Roland Gutierrez, who has served in the Texas State Senate representing District 19. He previously served as a member of the Texas House of Representatives from 2008 to 2021.
Yeah, Clint.
He is a representative of the people.
Clint, again, is 100% right. You'll never hear about any of these kids unless they can use those kids to stack their bodies and stand on them. You'll never hear about it. You'll never hear these people look at actual gun uses where someone uses a gun to kill another person as a cause of death versus other causes of death, like someone using a car or someone using a hammer. These people will not operate in a factual, logical world. It's all about the emotion. And it's what they use to shape the narrative, because they know most people aren't going to dig into actual factual evidence. That's why they hate John Locke so much, because John Locke, for decades and decades, has shown that their arguments are full of shit. And he uses facts and evidence to do so. And they can't stand that man. Doc, if by any way you're still in here, John Lott, the dude sitting middle table, gray suit, that is one of the guys that I was talking about. I'd love to see you do a show with, because he's such just an exceptionally smart guy, and I've read a lot of his stuff.
I met him for the first time going to Uvalde. As the first member, as we worshiped in church that Sunday after the massacre. He never stopped.
Roll call.
Stopped comforting those parents. He gave up his life, daily activities, to just be there and fight for them. Senator Gutierrez has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of Texas at San Antonio, Juris Doctorate from St. Mary's University of Law. Thank you for being here. Jack Brewer, who has a master's in education as CEO and portfolio manager of the Brewer Group Incorporated, founder and executive director of the Jack Brewer Foundation, chair of the America First Policy Institute Center for Opportunity Now. He is an ordained minister and a professor at the Fordham Gabelli School of Business, where he is the program director for the Athletes and Artists Executive MBA program. Mr. Brewer is also a former NFL safety who was appointed to the U.S. Commission for the Social Status of Black Men and Boys under the previous administration. Welcome. Jack Locke, Jr., PhD, is an economist and commentator who focuses on guns and crime. During the previous administration, he served as a senior advisor for research and statistics in the Office of Justice Program.
Look, Vanessa, you know good and well the government is not going to stand up there and admit that they failed on every single level, because they still have to push their narrative. It's all right if the government fails. If they fail and they screw people over, it's fine. We just need more laws. So what if the dude could have been civilly committed and he would have been off the street getting mental help? Nope, we just got to go after the gun. Oh, shit, by the way, I guess he shot a whole lot of people while we were sitting around and weren't doing anything. And then when we have a chance to respond to it, there were so many different avenues we could have approached it. We're stuck in a hallway with our thumbs in our asses, when someone could have walked around to a window because it's an outside room and shot the dude through the window. But you leaving him in a room with a bunch of defenseless children, he could have walked around and knifed every one of them in that amount of time. But again, Democrats only like bodies when they can stand on them. They don't like facts. They like emotion.
And in the Office of Legal Policy in the United States Department of Justice. Dr. Lott has held research and teaching positions at various academic institutions, including the University of Chicago, Yale University, the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, Stanford University, UCLA, and Rice University, and he was the chief economist at the United States Sentencing Commission from 1988 to 1989. He holds a PhD in economics from UCLA. Welcome.
Boy, she tried to keep his introduction short as possible.
Did I get that? Melchiano, she's got a thumbs up. Was in the second grade at Sandy Hook Elementary School when a gunman entered the school and killed 26 people on December 14th, 2012. Yesterday was the 10-year commemoration and recognition of that day. In 2018, she participated in the March for Our Lives. She began to mature, a student-led demonstration calling for an action to end gun violence. In 2020, she joined the Junior Newtown Action Alliance, became its legislative coordinator. Last year, Nicole is just a senior at Newtown High School at this time. Welcome. Chief Anthony D. Holt is Associate Vice President and Chief of Police at Wayne State University during a career spanning more than 40 years. Chief Holt rose through the ranks and held multiple positions within the University Police Department. He is the past president of the Metro Detroit chapter of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and currently serves as Special Advisor to the National President of Noble and is a member of the Noble Executive Board.
Yeah, Corey, we all gonna need a good laugh after all this.
T. Christian Heine is Vice President of Policy at Brady. He began advocating for stronger gun laws after a man with a history of violence shot his parents on Memorial Day in 2005. His father survived multiple gunshots, but sadly, his mother was killed. In the wake of this tragedy, Mr. Heine and his father started a chapter of the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence in Ventura County, California, and helped to pass several local ordinances. Since that time, Mr. Heine has successfully developed, lobbied, and helped implement a variety of local, state, and federal policies. Thank you for your work on the Emily Vaughn Storage Act and other legislation. Before joining Brady, he served as the legislative director at the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. As I begin to welcome you, all of you as distinguished witnesses, and thank you for your participation, I will start by reassuring the nation.
Did she just steal the couch cushions or drapes out of a cheap ass motel and throw them on? Just asking.
That you are under oath and telling the truth to your best of your capacity. I ask you to stand and raise your right hand at this time. As you raise your right hand, I will administer the oath. Do you swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Please note that your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes to help you stay within that time.
You may be right about that, Vanessa.
There is a timing light on the screen. While the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals that your 5 minutes have expired. And before I recognize Faith Mata for 5 minutes, allow me to acknowledge a friend and colleague who joined me on the first and I believe only field hearing from the federal government in Uvalde, and that is Congressman Castro of San Antonio is here with us today. Thank him for his presence here today. It is important for the family to know that the federal government from different committees is concerned about you. And so I ask Ms. Mata to begin her testimony. You're recognized now for 5 minutes.
Good morning. First and foremost, I would like to thank Chairman Jackson Lee, Ranking Member Biggs, and other members for allowing me the opportunity to speak and share my story. My name is Faith Mata. I am a 21-year-old coming up on my last semester of college, preparing for my future. A new future without my little sister, Tess, and a future of having to navigate this new life without her. I was an only child for quite some time. It was just myself and my parents, Veronica and Jerry. Being alone was hard, and a lesson of being independent. When I reached 10, my parents had a conversation to let me know they would not be having any more children. It would just be me. I remember crying and begging for them to please bring me a sibling. I didn't want to grow up alone. Not even 3 months later, my mom got a call letting her know she was pregnant. And I now was going to be a big sister. I can still recall the days going with my mom to her appointments, seeing the sonograms, and soon finding out Tess was a girl. All up until the day she was born, February 6, 2012. Bringing Tess into our life was a blessing in disguise. My sister brightened our darkest days. Tess was the outspoken, courageous, daring, determined, and nurturing person in our family. Our family was whole at this point. We would have family night every Sunday, where my dad would put on movies or suggested movies. Tess convinced my parents to bring our mattresses into our living room, and we would all sleep in the same room. Those days were the best, no matter how annoying it was sleeping next to her. It was an unsaid tradition of taking countless road trips every summer to a new destination we had never been before, and spending time just as a family. We were so happy. My family was perfect in my eyes. Then came time for me to move 2.5 hours away from home to begin my college career. It was hard being away from home and not being able to see my sister grow day by day. Every time I came to visit, Tess was getting bigger and smarter before my very eyes. It is a beautiful thing to see as an older sibling. But being the older sibling, it is my duty and obligation to be her role model, and the person whom Tess admired. She was my purpose and strength to be the best I could be. It was always bittersweet having her run out of our house to come and greet me with hugs and smiles. And it hurt seeing her cry and beg me to stay just a little longer when I had to leave back home. Even though I was away at college, our bond was strong, and it was so precious to me and her. We talked numerous times of her attending my soon-to-be alma mater and how she would live with me while she went to school. We were planning our futures to make sure we would always be together. May 24th, 2022. I was getting ready for work around noon when my cousin had alerted me to call my mom. My mom said, "It's okay. The officer said it was a barricaded subject." I proceed to call my dad. He's standing in front of Robb Elementary and tells me, "There are so many people here. It looks like a war zone." Fast forward about an hour, news goes around, a teacher has been shot, along with 8 students. My heart sinks, but still not knowing who the teacher is or the kids. My thoughts were, it's not my sister. It can't be. This would never happen to us. Then full panic kicks in. My mom calls to tell me, "They're moving kids to the Civic Center. No luck finding Tess." Dots start connecting. The teacher was in fact my sister's, and many of the kids that were considered missing at the time were all
Later,
in the
Bernie.
same
Take it easy,
classes,
brother.
111 and 112.
Have a good time with the
My
wife.
roommate drove me back to Uvalde, where along the way I was calling hospitals in San Antonio, Texas, looking for my sister. After 2 hours of driving, I was at the Civic Center with my parents, where we waited in a room with other family members. We waited about 8.5 hours until we found out my sister was among the 21 that were deceased. The days following the death of my sister, I took on the responsibilities and tasks that my parents could not bear to do. My parents should not have to plan their own child's funeral. So I felt the need to step in when they need.
No parent should have to plan their child's fucking funeral. Coming from someone with 2 very young children, I don't ever want to even think about planning my children's funerals. But these people up here will use her to push very emotional arguments to push their agenda. And when they're done with this girl, when they're done with this other young lady sitting on this panel, they won't give a good goddamn what happens to them because they'll no longer be useful.
Needed me the most. Our life has changed forever. It has darkened because our light has left. The child and the little human who once made this family whole is no longer with us. Tess will never get to experience the life we had prayed she would live. She will never graduate high school, never fall in love herself, never be present at my wedding. And we will never know how scared she was in her last moments in that classroom. All we have left is the questions which was once filled with her laughter and the stillness that only Tess could help us move out of. Today I am here sharing my story, but we are not tired. Are we not tired of hearing the stories of victims? Of hearing them from victims' families? Are we not tired of hearing yet another tragedy because of gun violence? When is enough enough? I truly hope that this never happens to any other family in the days, months, or years to come. This debatable topic on assault rifles should not be brought up again because someone else's child or sibling was murdered. It's just an excuse at this point. You may never understand what my family is going through, and I'm not asking you to. But today, you can make a change to help families never have to feel what my family feels, the families of Uvalde feel, and the many others of the mass shootings. Thank you.
And see, this is where it's so screwed up that they'll use a little girl like this, and I call her a little girl or young woman. Completely emotional arguments, has no idea of the actual role of government, not state, not federal, anything like that. Has no idea about constitutional protections, has no idea what any of our natural rights are. But they're going to take her and pimp her out to get an emotional argument out of her. Girl needs therapy. She doesn't need to be in front of Congress.
We now
Yeah, you're 100% right, roll
recognize
call.
Dr. Guerrero. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm grateful for the chance to testify before this committee and share my perspective on gun safety in America. As a rifle-owning son of a rancher, as a pediatric doctor, and as a member of a broken community traumatized by the loss of 19 children and 2 teachers in May, I believe my experiences reflect the deep complexities of the gun control issue, and my feelings no doubt echo those of many in our country. But today I want to share a few things that I know for certain, because I am a doctor, and when it comes to solving problems, we doctors prefer to stick to the facts and the science.
Okay, and I remember hearing some of his testimony earlier today, which is absolutely insane. And I'm sorry, homeboy, just because you have a medical degree doesn't make you any smarter, any sharper, any better than any goddamn buddy else, especially when it comes to ballistics, because you know jack shit about them.
Rather than get caught up in the emotion, no matter how hard that is. When you choose a career in medicine, you're signing up to make people better and save lives. Healing is always the ultimate goal. And we use a number of strategies to do that depending on the challenge. In the modern developed world, we have a plethora of incredible machines, tools, equipment, regimens, and machines that test, diagnose, administer, and sustain to cure. You've all no doubt crossed paths with at least one of these. Maybe it was a Doppler, an MRI machine, or a course of anti-COVID drugs. For my
let me tell you something about a Doppler, because this is something very interesting to me. Can't remember how many weeks pregnant my wife was, but they actually used a Doppler radar to go in and measure my daughter's kidney function, blood flow, and a bunch of other things, which basically proved that my daughter was a life separate from my wife, growing separately, developing separately. But you assholes don't believe that.
My patients, I'm always looking for the most effective remedy or tool that I can find to relieve their pain, to stem the bleeding, or to kill the pathogen. So I understand the power of an effective tool. The AR-15 is a very effective tool. It was designed to deliver quick and heavy fire in combat. It was made to be light and easy to use. And it's as exacting in its application on the battlefield as radiation in a patient with cancer. So let me ask you this. How comfortable would you be if every day during homeroom, your kids and grandchildren were being administered radiation therapy for 2 hours? Never mind the books with suggested material in the library. I'm talking about highly radioactive particles flooding into the beautiful, healthy bodies of your precious children on a daily basis. Why not? We have all the potential to develop cancer. We all have the potential to develop cancer. Maybe it could be preventative. If this sounds like a ridiculous or terrifying prospect, you're right. Because cancer radiation doesn't belong in the bodies of healthy children. Just like AR-15s or any semi-automatic weapon that holds high-capacity magazines don't belong in the hands of everyday civilians, especially when they're not even old enough to buy a pack of beer.
Then we
They're
need to
not
lower the
appropriate for
drinking
self-defense
age.
in the home, in the school, or in the supermarket. They are and always have been designed as military-grade killing machines.
Nope, they haven't. That was pretty much a civilian design until it was pushed through military trials. And the AR-15 is not a particularly good, well, the M16, I will say, and the M4, that family, are not particularly good at killing. That's not why they were introduced in intermediate cartridges. That's not why they were introduced in battlefields. That is why, in most cases, if you're hunting with an AR-15 or AR-10 platform, it can't be chambered in 223 if you're actually hunting big game, because a 223 round or a 5.56 round is pretty minuscule comparatively.
We've made significant progress on sensible gun legislation. Most Americans agree that we need background checks, age limits, and safe storage rules. But one of the arguments I hear on repeat from the chorus of objections to the ban of assault weapons is that the problem isn't the guns, it's the people who pull the trigger. This is a meritless argument. How does an anti-Mexican extremist walk into Walmart and kill 23 people in minutes without a semi-automatic rifle? How does an anti-LGBT...
I could do way worse than that with a pump-action shotgun, you fucking numbnuts. This is why I don't get my choice of rifles or anything from doctors. If I have hemorrhoids, I will come see you. If I want to know what I need to defend myself with, well, then I have a little bit of background knowledge on stuff like that. It's also why your scary AR-15s, matter of fact, all long guns combined, account for very, very low deaths in the United States because they can suck.
Radical slaughtered 49 clubgoers without his Sig Sauer MCX. The children in the classrooms of Sandy Hook Elementary, Marjorie Stone Douglas, and Robb Elementary School never stood a chance against the speed and the power of the weapons they faced. And let me tell you, these kids, they weren't helpless victims before that day. They were spunky, intelligent, street-smart kids. I know this because some of them were my patients. Tess Mata, who you just heard about, I knew since she was a newborn. Amory Garza was 2 months old. Amory was trying to save her friends when the 18-year-old burst into her classroom wielding the AR-15 he bought the day after his birthday.
How long did the shooting go on after this piece of shit entered the building? How long was everybody out there twiddling their thumbs? Faced with a room or 2 rooms full of defenseless children, he could have killed the same amount of people with a freaking spoon. Because law enforcement, the hand of government, failed them on every single level. He's got an AR-15. Okay. Have you ever seen what a slug or buckshot does to the human body, or any living body for that matter? Well, wait till they figure out this. Hold on. Wait till they figure out this little old overpowered 22 round is nowhere near as powerful as a 30-06 or a 308. See if they don't come for the next high-powered rifle.
She was calling 911 when she was shot to death. She knew what to do. She was brave. She was a fighter. But against a weapon like that, she had no chance. No chance to run, to hide, or to shout for help. The following is audio that I was given by a parent of kids from across the rooms where the kids were murdered. These children survived. This is the shrill screaming of kids trying to get out while their classmates are being murdered.
You want to know what that sound is? That's the sound of children getting failed on every fucking level from people who are supposed to be protecting them and giving them safe spaces. And you can take all these away you want. All these 223, 5.56, whatever. Take all those away. And in that same amount of time, that dude could have done way more damage with a pump action shotgun. So it'd be one step after the next step, after the next step, after the next step, until we look like, I don't know, Canada or some other place. And then there's still going to be mass shootings, and then they're going to want to put in another law and another law and another law. How would that have changed if when he went to turn into that classroom, if a teacher had been armed and been able to shoot him? Are they coming back? They might be fixing to come back. So
The hearing dealing with Uvalde, the search for a bipartisan solution to gun violence, has now come to order. And I will yield at this time to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Demings. The gentlelady is recognized. Out of the friendship and collaboration, I will yield to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon, for her time. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Chairwoman Jackson-Lee. Thank you for calling this hearing and to all of our witnesses for testifying here today. Yesterday, we marked the 10th anniversary of the devastating shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And today we reflect on the tragedy earlier this year at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde that took 21 lives and wounded many others. Our children deserve bright futures, not the traumatization of active shooter drills or actual active shooters while learning their ABCs. Far too many lives have been cut short by senseless gun violence. Faith Mata, I too am tired of hearing the stories of victims. Although I'm incredibly grateful to you and your parents, to Nicole and her colleagues from Sandy Hook, and all the families impacted by school shootings in Uvalde, Parkland, Sandy Hook, and Columbine and beyond, in communities of faith in Charleston, Texas, Minnesota, and more, the families of shoppers in grocery stores from Buffalo to Boulder, and relatives of victims of shootings at places of entertainment in Orlando.
Mention every
Colorado,
victim, but you never mention
as well as
lives
to the
saved
advocates in
by
my
guns.
district and communities across America who've experienced gun violence, but turned that experience into action and advocacy for their communities. Today's hearing has been called to explore whether there are bipartisan solutions to gun violence, and I would welcome actionable, real suggestions from our colleagues across the aisle based upon actual data and facts. And if they don't have real solutions, then I think it's important that all Americans know that. One of the issues we have in devising bipartisan solutions is that we have to work from a shared set of facts. I appreciate the perspective of several of our witnesses who have shared recommendations based upon verifiable data and evidence. We know what the problem is. As Dr. Guerrero notes, guns are now the leading cause of death.
No, they're
among
not.
children in our country, not any other country. And more Americans of all ages have become victims of gun violence, including myself. It shouldn't surprise anyone that in the country that has more untraceable guns and unregulated gun users per capita than any other industrialized country in the world,
they want
also
the
has
guns
the highest
completely
rate of gun
regulated and
violence
completely
per
traceable,
capita.
which still
At
won't
the
stop
outset, we
anything.
need to confront the myth that the Second Amendment bars any restrictions on the possession or use of any guns by any person, a myth perpetuated by the gun industry while reaping billions in profits. In fact, the Second Amendment is not a suicide pact, and like every other part of the Constitution, is subject to qualification in certain circumstances. What we don't need is pseudoscience or deeply flawed research that's been repeatedly debunked over several decades, as is unfortunately the case with Mr. Lott's research. Senator Gutierrez asked, how many children have to be murdered before we're willing to ban the chosen weapon of school shooters? And how many people have to be killed before we take reasonable steps to end murder, and I would add, prevent suicide? In the 116th and 117th Congress, my colleagues and I have proposed legislation to implement evidence-based solutions to prevent gun violence, which are both constitutional and broadly popular.
No, they're not.
Including universal background checks, a ban on assault-style weapons, extreme risk protection laws, and safe storage laws. We need to enact those laws. One area where I am in agreement with our colleagues is that it's important that we enforce the laws that are already on the books to the fullest extent possible, although that alone is insufficient. Unfortunately, decades of underfunding and legislative roadblocks have made it impossible for the critical Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to fulfill its duties when it comes to keeping guns out of the wrong hands. Mr. Heine, earlier this year, your organization published a report entitled Uncovering the Truth About Pennsylvania Crime Guns that tracks guns recovered in crimes traced to gun dealers in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. One of the most striking things in the report is that 90% of these guns can be traced to a handful of Pennsylvania's gun dealers. Can you elaborate a little bit on the findings around these numbers and tell us what the problem here?
Hold on, because I got to pause this right here. So you're saying 90% of the guns can be traced to PA gun dealers, and the reason that so many guns can be traced to these gun dealers is because there are so few gun dealers there, if you have limited amount of gun dealers selling to a very large population, carry the 1, divide by 0. Oh, let me get it. That means that you have a very few number of shops selling a very large number of guns, and then guns get stolen and used in crimes, and you can trace them back to those FFLs when they made legal sales in the first place. Yeah, my math's right there. And what you have to understand about Noble and some of these other law enforcement organizations is these are not line officers in most cases. These are political appointees.
Areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for the question, Congresswoman. I couldn't agree with you more. We talk a lot about gun violence and solving for gun violence in terms of who's pulled the trigger. And what we don't ask enough of the time is, where did the gun come from? That Pennsylvania report made it really clear. And a more jarring statistic is that 50% of the guns that were recovered in Pennsylvania, of the near 100,000, 50% of them came from only 1% of Pennsylvania dealers. This is a very solvable problem. And if we make tactical law enforcement investments to go after these individuals, these negligent and irresponsible dealers, we can have a tangible impact.
When you close down those FFLs,
there
that's
are
going to
too
throw
many
that
communities
business on
where
the
it's
other
easier
FFLs,
to find
which
a
is going to make
firearm
their numbers
than it
go
is
up,
to
which will
find
get
fresh
them
produce.
shut
And
down.
these are not things that grow on trees. So
These are
we
not
have got to
stupid fucking
enable ATF to do their job and to go after these irresponsible and negligent dealers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I see that my time has expired, but I would like to request unanimous consent to insert into the record the report we were just discussing, uncovering the truth about Pennsylvania crime guns. And is that for unanimous consent?
Without objection, so ordered.
Okay. I'd also like to submit for the record a November 3rd, 2022 article from the New Yorker titled "The Shoddy Conclusions of the Man Shaping the Gun Rights Debate."
Later, Corey. Take it easy,
John
brother.
Lodson,
Go
the
slay some
influential
dragons.
pro-gun researcher in the country, but his methods and findings have been
That's
repeatedly
a hell of a lot more fun than listening to
Without
this shit.
objection, so ordered.
I yield back.
Pleased to recognize now the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Jordan of Ohio.
Thank you, Madam Chair, but yield my time to the gentleman from Kentucky.
I thank the gentleman from Ohio.
And the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Lott, I was looking in your written testimony, the part of it that you didn't get to elaborate on in your opening statement. And I noticed something remarkable, a sentence here that says there was no drop in the number of mass public shootings with assault weapons during the 1994 to 2004 so-called assault weapons ban. Can you elaborate on that? And one other thing I want to point out before I turn that over to you is one of the most horrific shootings in history was at Columbine, and it happened in 1999, 5 years into this these so-called assault weapons ban. But can you elaborate on whether mass public shootings went down or up? Because today I've heard several times it stated that the 94 to 2004 assault weapons ban worked, and it's being proposed again. So I think it's important that we get the data and to the document that the chair just introduced into the record. I want to say you are the only authority that we have here today on statistics and data. So if the other side would like to offer some facts or statistics and data, I would welcome them to bring a witness that's as knowledgeable as Mr. Lott on this subject at some time. And I ask Mr. Lott to answer the question. Microphone, please.
Just one quick thing. You know, you look around the world, people seem to think that this only happens in the United States. If you just compare even Western Europe to the United States, does anybody know where the two worst mass public shootings were? They were in Europe. France in November 2015 had 130 people killed. Norway, about a decade ago, had 67 people killed. France, it takes over a year to go through the licensing process. It costs thousands of dollars. You have to get 2 psychiatric evaluations to be able to go through. They have every law that every state in the United States has, plus more. And yet they've had worse mass public shootings on both total and per capita rates. Anyway, there are lots of different measures of mass public shootings. The only one that people look at who make this claim that the number of mass public shootings went down is by Louis Clarivas. who's at the Teachers College at Columbia. And what he does, he has a different measure than anybody else. He looks at 6 or more people killed rather than the typical 4 or more. But much more importantly, he inconsistently includes cases involving robberies or gang fights. So most of the measures, the FBI measure for active shooting or for mass public shootings, specifically measures public attacks that are not part of some other type of crime like a robbery or a gang fight. They're trying to get at those cases where the whole point of the attack was simply to go and kill or harm other people. That's not saying that gang fights over drug turf aren't important, but the causes and solutions to going and stopping the types of mass public shootings that get people's attention in the news media are very different from the types of cases that you see that get the news coverage. The other thing that he does is you'd think he'd be looking at attacks involving assault weapons, but he lumps them together with all things. Well, even with his data, all the data shows that if it was a ban on assault weapons that was somehow causing a drop to occur, then the percentage of attacks involving assault weapons should have fallen when you have the ban, and then should have gone up. You know, if it's assault weapons that are driving the drop and then driving the increase after the ban sunset. But in fact, even with his data, what you find, because he lumps both assault weapons and other weapons together, even with his data, the increase that he claims occurs during the 94 to 2004 period is driven entirely by non-assault weapons being used more during that period of time. But anyway, it's pretty clear, no matter how you measure this, in fact, Clarivas was an expert in the California assault weapons ban case where I was an expert on the other side. And the judge ruled that his evidence was contradictory and was not acceptable by the court.
Well, one thing also that seems somewhat disingenuous about this claim from the other side of the aisle is the number of AR-15s, so-called assault weapons or military-style weapons, that were in circulation and ownership in the United States practically doubled during that period because the manufacturers quickly changed the cosmetics. The ban was based on cosmetic features of the gun. And so the number of the people kept selling it. I bought an AR-15 between 1994 and 2004 myself, because in fact, they weren't really banned by function, only by style. So I think that deserves further investigation, whether that ban worked or not. It did not work.
Dude, the DOJ even said that they had no measurable effect.
Gentleman from Kentucky is correct. The legislation that we have is updated and modifies the distinction between one group versus another group, which is why we absolutely need, when I say group of assault weapons, why we absolutely need the law to be passed now. This hearing is about what the federal government can do.
The federal government can't do
grieving
anything.
Families grieve year after year and decade after decade. I'm pleased to yield now to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Demings.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and to all of our witnesses. There are no words that can fully express how grateful we are to you for being here today to discuss this very important issue. Here we are again, talking about gun violence in America. As members of Congress, our primary responsibility is the safety of the American people. When we think about our own children, our own grandchildren, wouldn't we do anything at all to protect them? Well, our responsibility goes a little further here because we have taken an oath to protect America's.
No, you took an oath to defend the Constitution, and the Constitution does not give you that power. The Constitution says that you need to solve disputes in between states, provide for a common defense, do treaties, shit like that, not manage firearms. But you're a statist, so you believe the state has all the power.
Children. As I hear the discussion, I am just, certainly as a former law enforcement officer, I'm just disappointed that we are not fulfilling our oath or our promise to protect America's children. I I do have to recognize the presence of Noble's Executive Director, Dwayne Crawford. It's great to see you, and Noble member, Chief Holt. I've heard a lot of stuff. I've heard that we just want to take guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens. That's nonsense. I carried one for 27 years. My father was a hunter. I grew up with guns. This is about keeping guns out of the hands of dangerous people. People who walk into a classroom, Faith, and gun down innocent children, like your sister, to her parents. It's about keeping guns out of the hands of dangerous people. And if we aren't working to do that, as we sit here and talk about a lot of different things, we aren't working to do that. We are not doing our job. There's been a lot of talk about law enforcement, as there should be. I watched the failed response, and we need to get to the bottom of it. But we do know that things went wrong long before the shooter, the 18-year-old, walked into Robb Elementary that day. Like legislators who had the power to pass laws proactively to protect children failed to do that. Seatbelt laws don't save everybody, do they? But doggone it, they have made a difference. We have.
If you could prove that seatbelts actually, I don't know, cost more lives than they saved, and one, I don't believe in seatbelt laws anyway, it's none of the goddamn government's business. But firearms themselves actually save way more lives than they take every single day. But again, you got to get to the emotional argument, because you can't argue on the facts. That's why they hate John Lott so damn much.
Have a responsibility to do better than just throw ridiculous rhetoric across the aisle every day. We have this moment with people who were there. There's been a lot of talk about assault weapons and military-style weapons. Doctor, you gave a very vivid testimony about the victims and what the weapon did to the victims. I know you're not making that up. I served as a law enforcement officer. The chance of survival, I've had coworkers shot with the same weapons. The chance of survival is about zero. And so there seems to be, I hear defending the weapons. What about the children? Doctor, please, again, could you talk about what you experienced on the scene that day, so the American people, those who really want to listen and do something about it, can fully understand the devastation caused by the weapon that was used?
As I've mentioned before, devastating injuries to the point of shredding, decapitation, holes in chests. And I'll actually even tell you, since Uvalde is a small community, things travel quickly through our community, and medical people or other people that were there that happened to see what they saw when they walked in, I can explain to you what they've mentioned to me as well. Kids with part of their faces missing, limbs torn apart. There's a little girl alive today still who survived, who's missing part of her extremities. Just devastating injuries that no one could possibly survive.
Faith, and to Tessa's parents, God bless you and thank you so much for your advocacy.
Okay, let's get to some factual arguments here. If the 5.56 round was so devastating, why in the hell would the Army be seeking and have sought for a long time to get away from the 5.56 round? Because obviously they want the lethality. 5.56 is so just majorly devastating. Why would they seek to change rounds? Why would there be so many reports of combat where soldiers have shot people multiple times with 5.56 only to watch the sumbitch get up and walk away?
Just on behalf of your daughter, but for other children. Chief Holt, if you could just talk a little bit about Noble's position as we talk about gun violence and how we can reduce it in the most powerful nation in the world.
Again, our position is not to eliminate a section of the Constitution. We are all for accountable responsible gun ownership. What we're not responsible for are those who are unresponsible, who skim the way that you purchase weapons and the use of how they use these weapons. We would like to see this great divide come across and we unite in a really the only goal is safety and to save the kids who are victims of this sort of incidents.
Again, thank you all so very much. God bless you. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, and I'd like to yield at this time to the gentleman from Kentucky for his time. Ms. Massey, you're recognized.
I thank the chairwoman, and thank you for having this hearing.
Now, see, why aren't there other people all over that side of the aisle?
It is true that President Biden has expressed his desire to ban all semi-automatic weapons. And most of the firearms sold today, and most of the firearms owned today, are semi-automatic weapons. So I think it's disingenuous to say that you don't want to ban guns or take them from people who are law-abiding citizens. The president didn't make an exception for law-abiding citizens when he said he wanted to ban semi-automatic weapons. Mr. Lott, you unearthed something that's very disturbing to me in your oral testimony. You said that the NICS background check results in racially disparate outcomes, that if you were a black male or Hispanic male, that you would be more likely to be denied, a law-abiding male, more likely to be denied the purchase of a firearm when you go to purchase it legally from the gun store. Why do you think that is? And what can we do in the next Congress to get the data to confirm that or to dispel that myth?
The data's already there.
Not true.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. It's a very simple point. You'll constantly hear things like there are 3.8 million dangerous, prohibited people that have been stopped from buying guns because of background checks.
Not true.
That's simply false. What they should say is that there are 3.8 million initial denials, and about 99% of those are mistakes. It's one thing to stop a felon from buying a gun. It's another thing to stop somebody simply because they have a roughly phonetically similar name and similar birthday from being able to go and buy a gun. And the problem is that people tend to have names similar to others in their racial groups. Hispanics tend to have names similar to other Hispanics. Blacks tend to have names similar to other blacks. And the problem is that 18% of Hispanic males have a felony background. 34% of black males have a felony background. And the problem is, for whites, it's like 6%. For Asians, it's like 3%. And the problem that creates is that law-abiding, good black males or Hispanic males are more likely to have their names and birthdays confused with somebody who's prohibited because of this broad brush of using roughly phonetically similar names and birthdays, and it causes errors. Now, you can appeal. The problem is that it's a complicated process to appeal those mistakes, and it costs about $3,000 on up. And so what you've essentially done is good, law-abiding people who want to go and protect themselves and their family, poor and middle-income class people, are being prevented from buying guns through no fault of their own, simply because they have a name similar to somebody who's prohibited. And there's a simple way of fixing this. If private companies did background checks in the same way that the federal government does, they would be sued out of existence under federal law if they had an error rate that was 1/100th the error rate that the federal government has. Why not simply require that the federal government has to meet the same standards for doing background checks that private companies have to meet? Now, when I was working in the Department of Justice, I tried to go and get the data on the error rates by race, but the FBI fought against us getting that at every step of the way that was there.
Isn't it true that data is collected on every 4473 form that's filled out at a gun store?
Exactly.
Race.
You know the race, you know the sex of everybody there. We know who applied to get it to begin with. We know the rejection rate, even at the first stage, where the National BATF office goes through it. About 94% of the false positive cases are dropped at the first. There are 5 stages of review. About 94% are dropped at the first stage of review. There's no lawyers involved. They're simply double checking the paperwork. The problem is they don't go back and tell people about the mistakes that were there. They just go, you're denied, and that's it. And you have to then go and appeal to go and get a mistake fixed then at that point.
Can you tell us about the laws that are on the books in all 50 states that resemble red flag laws, but actually help the person who may be a danger to themselves or others?
So they go by different names. Baker Act in California, 5150, in Florida, 5150 in California. What happens is, if you are concerned that somebody's a danger to themselves or others, you go to the police will evaluate. If they have reasonable suspicion, they'll take the person into a psychiatric expert. If psychiatric experts can have 24 to 72 hours, depending on the state, to evaluate the person. At that point, if they think that there's a reasonable suspicion, there can be an immediate hearing. If the person can't afford a lawyer, one who's provided for them at that time, and evidence can be cross-examined at that point. The thing is, at that point, judges have a broad range of options. They could say, look, I'm concerned. If you go and see a psychiatric expert after a week or 2 weeks, we will evaluate. They could take away the person's guns. Or in the ultimate thing, because about 99% of these cases are used for suicide concerns with red flag laws, you could involuntarily commit the person. The problem with red flag laws is no psychiatric experts, no mental health care experts are involved in the process. The only thing that the judge sees is a written complaint by maybe one person that's there. If you really believe somebody's suicidal, or you really believe somebody's a danger to themselves or others, just simply taking away their guns is not a serious solution to the problem there. If somebody's really suicidal, you're telling me there are not other ways that somebody can go and commit suicide? But the way these laws are set up is they want you to think if you only take away a person's guns, problem solved. There's no problem at that point. You know, people can drive a car into a crowded sidewalk that's there and go and kill people if they're really a danger to other people.
So before I yield back, just
That chick back there shaking her head, but we just went through a case the other day. The guy actually got found guilty where he took his SUV.
The difference between those laws is there's due process,
right,
and the person receives treatment. Whereas red flag laws, you just take the person's gun and leave them without treatment, and there's no due process. I yield back.
I could analyze this discourse, but I simply say 5150, red flag laws that I happen to support, but none counter the idea that the person is alive. When someone is shot with a gun, a child, an assault weapon, they're dead, and they can't be brought back. I'm happy to yield to the gentlelady from Georgia.
You're such a vile woman.
Thank you,
I
Madam
swear to
Chair,
Christ.
and I'm happy to reel us back into what is really important today. And I want to say thank you to every one of our witnesses here, especially those that have been affected by the scourge of gun violence, our family members, our victims. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And for our expert witnesses who've been doing this work for so long, I too am a gun violence survivor. That is the reason why I sit here today before you, because I know how important it is that we change the entire culture that every community in this country is suffering under with the extremism of gun violence in America. And sadly, today we are here to address the tragedy in Uvalde. We are here to address the 19 children and 2 teachers murdered by an 18-year-old with 2 assault weapons and 2,000 rounds of ammunition. Yesterday, we commemorated the 10th anniversary of the massacre at Sandy Hook, a decade to the day since 20 first graders and 6 teachers were murdered by a 20-year-old who fired over 150 bullets from his Bushmaster in under 5 minutes. In Sandy Hook, 15 children in Lauren Rousseau's classroom were murdered. One, a 6-year-old girl, she played dead among the other bodies. She was the only one to survive. Covered in blood, the first thing that she said to her mother was, "Mommy, I'm okay, but all my friends are dead." In Uvalde, an 11-year-old, Mia Cerillo, saw her friend shot next to her. She smeared the blood of her friend all over herself and played dead on the floor. In that decade, the decade that passed between these two murders of our children, no substantial gun safety legislation was ever signed into law. After first graders were murdered in Sandy Hook, it took a decade and the murder of fourth graders in Uvalde before we finally were able to pass substantial legislation that helps to protect our children and to keep our families safe. I promise you, this is only the beginning. It's imperative that our efforts to build on these gun safety policies continue, and we cannot afford to wait another decade, another 5 years, another 2 years. We cannot afford 10 more years. We cannot not allow another Uvalde, another Parkland, nor another Sandy Hook. America is crying out, demanding that Congress act and that we act now.
Such
Dr. Guerrero, you
fiery
are a
speeches.
pediatrician who treated many of the children in Uvalde. In the past, you've described both what you saw, what you heard, the damage those guns and bullets caused to children from just mere feet away. Parents, you described screaming, crying, and begging for their children. As someone who has retold the tragedy of losing my own son to gun violence, I recognize that this is not an easy thing to relive over and over again. But could you please share with the American public, as what I have expressed before, your words, and they were refuted by my Republican colleagues. But can you please share with us, describe the scene inside the hospital during the aftermath of that terrible day?
So as I arrived to the hospital, there were multiple parents outside, some of which recognized me and immediately started screaming their children's names, asking for me to find them. As I walked into the hallway of the hospital, chaos ensued. There was blood on the floor, children that were bloodied sitting in chairs in the hallways. One of them was Mia Rio, who spoke with us at the last committee.
Yeah, Bull, that actually fixed more issues than what they're talking
utter
about.
Chaos and just pandemonium. It almost seemed like a movie that really didn't exist. By this point, I was just trying to help the parents outside find their victim children, and this is when I was brought to see these two children that I spoke of earlier that were deceased. And as the day progressed, we just were told to wait for 14, 15 more kids that were coming, of course, that never came. And in our hearts, we knew that they had passed and that they had been killed on this day. Until this day, the community still suffers. We're in pain. We're not healed in any way or any way or fashion. But we know that we'll continue to fight.
What's up, PLE? What's happening, brother?
Thank you so very much for your courage, each and every one of you, the family members. My heart goes out to you because I understand exactly where you are and how you feel. And I promise you that I and my colleagues here on this committee, Democrats, will do everything that we can to protect and serve you going forward. And I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, and now I'm privileged to yield to the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Biggs of Arizona.
I thank the chair, and one of the witnesses today talked about, and this is kind of what the focus has been about, is on who pulled the trigger, and then where did that gun come from. But if you're really going to get to the resolution of a societal problem that is tragic and horrific, seems to me that you'd want to answer, at least try answering the question, is why did that person undertake to pull the trigger in the first place? Of course, my colleagues across the aisle referred to that question as, and theories that might pertain to that as being, I think they used the words idiotic and ridiculous. Well, it's tough to have a bipartisan solution when ad hominem attacks are is what you're hiding behind. I don't think that's really what any of us should be hiding behind. Chief Holt mentioned in his written and oral testimony that we should be focusing on and I can pull it out here. I want to say, because I thought it was pretty prescient. Comprehensive, non-judgmental, pragmatic, evidence-based approach. We're going to have a bipartisan solution. Seems to me that's where you would go. You would do it that way. But that isn't what typically happens in Congress, unfortunately. For those of you who've not dealt with Congress before, you probably didn't realize that. That's really, unfortunately.
Oh, I've watched you guys for a long time.
I want to go to Mr. Brewer. And I want you to tell me if you've explored and if you've tried to address the underlying causes of violence in society and even the root causes of violence of mass shooters.
Every day. Thank you, Mr. Biggs. Every day I face this. When you talk about violence, you talk about young kids in communities that have a little bit rougher than others and are faced with these type of situations. And I do it all the time. I go into the juveniles, also go into the prisons. And so to talk to a kid or a man and ask, why did you pull the trigger? Why did you do a drive-by shooting? You start to really uncover the things that were going on in their lives. And in my programs, over 85% of those men happen not to have a father in their lives. And so it could be idiocy, whatever you want to call it, but that's not what the Word of God says. The Word of God says, defend the fatherless and the widow. And if we don't do that, then our land will be hit with a curse. We're experiencing that curse. My brother next to me touched my Bible and said that Jesus was a man of action and not prayer. Jesus prayed, there's over 25 different verses in the Bible of Jesus praying. He was a praying man all the time. And so to think that you can go into these communities and actually affect the individuals that are pulling the trigger without getting to the spiritual battle that we're facing in our nation, that's idiocy, because that doesn't align with the Word of God. None of us in here are smart enough to come up with any solutions. And if we think we are, we need to reevaluate that.
Ooh, I can come up with solutions.
Come from the Word of God. And if we don't want to get back and humble ourselves before God and actually look at our kids in the eye and make sure that they are sound with strong parents and mentors, every kid is not going to have a mom and dad. But the ones that don't, they still deserve mentors. They still deserve direction. So why are we not in this panel right now talking about real solutions to help the children that are suffering in our communities? We have the money, the programs are there. But when we look at Chicago just this weekend, 21 kids shot at each other. That wasn't with an AR-15 or any type of assault weapon.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer. I'm going to yield my last minute to Burgess Owens, gentleman from Utah.
We have two topics here, my friends. One is the Second Amendment rights, and that's going to be a discussion for years to come. The other one is how do we take care of our kids today? I want you guys to keep this in mind. I'm going to read this one more time, because if our goal is to make sure our kids are safe, then we can talk about all the other issues that adults can deal with. How about this? Secure Our Students Act. Using billions of dollars of unused and already allocated funds from the American Rescue Plan that each district, Uvalde, Draper, Leon, and Tallahassee, each district would have what they need, their customized need: hard infrastructure, innovative software, or security personnel. Why would anyone vote against that? Take care of our kids. Let's get that done with first. So every fall we take our kids to school, we know they're gonna be okay. Let's have this debate for years to come. We want to about Second Amendments. Our children should be first and not be used as hostages, my friends. And that's what's happening right now today. We could stop this if we put the right legislation, make sure they're safe, period. I do about it.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I'm not going to extend my time anymore, and I'll yield back to you.
Arizona for his questioning. Now I'm privileged to yield to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Escobar. Thank you so very much. You are now recognized, Ms. Escobar.
Madam Chair, I want to express my deep gratitude to you for your leadership on this subcommittee and for bringing this issue forward and for making sure that we are doing
it's crazy how any of these people get elected.
Our communities and our children safe, and that we address the horrible epidemic of gun violence in our country. I want to thank our witnesses and extend my heartfelt condolences to those who have unfortunately had to experience mass shootings, who have lost family members to gun violence, and who are deeply traumatized by what has happened. I want you to know how much I admire your courage and your willingness to come forward. I imagine it must be very difficult to relive your trauma over and over again. And so thank you for doing this and speaking to the American people. On August 3rd, 2019, my own community of El Paso, Texas was targeted and was victim to a mass shooting. This one was a white supremacist who targeted my community because of his anti-immigrant, anti-Latino fervor. And he drove to El Paso in order to slaughter Mexican people and those who looked like immigrants. He used an AK-47 to slaughter 23 people. He injured dozens more. And in my community, just as Dr. Guerrero just stated, we are still living with the pain and the trauma, with the scars, the emotional, physical, and financial scars. And this is so frustrating to me to hear my colleagues try to talk about other issues. You know, I will work with anyone at any point in time on helping our families, on making schools safer. I'm all in, but we cannot ignore the primary cause of this kind of slaughter, the tool that is used, which is the gun. And trying to obfuscate and talk about anything other than the guns, especially these assault style weapons, we're never gonna solve this. We must solve this. We have to. We've got to stop this pain that so many communities are living with. And I will tell you, it was really, I would say, incredible to hear the ranking member earlier say that Democrats are trying to, quote, emasculate the Second Amendment. I don't even know what that means, but it seems like guns are somehow tied to male egos. Is that what this is about? Is this why people are dying? Is this why children are traumatized? Is this why America is such an outlier? This is really, again, deeply frustrating. But I want to get to our witnesses, and
because let's not look at actual facts. Let's not look at
to hear about the consequences of this kind of inaction. Dr. Guerrero, your testimony was powerful and painful, and I cannot imagine the trauma that you and other healthcare providers are living with. Can you tell us how you all are coping together, the medical personnel that had to deal with these babies who were slaughtered by this madman?
Well, I think my fellow colleagues and fellow family practitioners in my community who all see these children on a day-to-day basis in our community are just now reeling with the after effects, which include, full-blown PTSD and the siblings of these victims, and the other kids at the school who don't want to go to school anymore, whose parents are terrified to send them to school, and who now have to, face all these emotions moving into the holiday season, their first Christmas with their loved ones away. So overall, my community still bleeds with an open wound, and we continue to try to find our own ways to help each other to heal.
Thank you, Dr. Guerrero. And I have questions for everyone on the panel. I am out of time. I will just say this to Representative Gutierrez. Representative Gutierrez, thank you for your courage and your voice as well. Your community is going to need a lot of resources. In El Paso, many of my constituents are still needing surgeries. Many of them still need therapy and psychiatric help. And the costs are not just emotional, the costs are not just physical, the costs are financial. And to all of you in Uvalde, my love to all of you. I keep you close in my thoughts and in my prayers. Madam Chair, I yield back.
We thank the gentlelady for her testimony, and we're about to recognize Ms. Tiffany, and we will give him the respect to access the technology that he has to access in order to be prepared. Again, as I do that, let me acknowledge and thank Ranking Member Biggs, Full Committee Chairman, Ranking Member Jordan, Full Committee Chairman Nadler, Mr. Owens, Mr. Massey, Mr. Gomert, Mr. Stubbe, now Mr. Tiffany, who joined us in this hearing. We're very grateful to you. And let me acknowledge the members who have joined us here, the Full Committee Chairman, Mr. Nadler, Ms. Demings, Ms. Macbeth, Ms. Scanlon, Ms. Dean, Ms. Escobar, who have joined us. Mr. Liu was here as well. Want to acknowledge and make sure that we have our gratitude expressed on the record for this very important hearing. We do want to acknowledge that
This hearing's just another freaking dog and pony show where you guys push gun control and the Republicans act like a fucking speed bump and nobody tries to address the issues.
Answer the questions of those who sacrificed to come here. We'll be happy to now yield to the ranking member of the subcommittee for unanimous consent.
If the Constitution actually held any
Thank you,
power
Madam Chair. I
in the
referred
United
to these
States,
two pieces
none of those people would be
earlier.
sitting on this
This from the
dais.
CBS Chicago, dated December 5th, 2022. Chicago man shoots, wounds 2 of 3 suspects in carjacking. And then November 24th, 22, Newsweek.com, woman defends herself with concealed carry gun. I'd ask that they be entered into the record.
While you're doing that, I have some additional documents, but I'm going to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the report of the DOJ Inspector General. I'll refer to that in a minute.
Well, the thing is, they're the,
On the next
cause for a
background
lot
check,
of these
and I'll refer
problems.
to that in a minute. Am I recognizing Mr. Tiffany? Ms. Tiffany is here. Ms. Tiffany, it is now your time. I recognize you for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I yield my time to Representative Massey from Kentucky, if he is there.
I'm here, and I appreciate the gentleman from Wisconsin.
Gentleman has yielded time to Mr. Massey. Ms. Massey, you're recognized.
I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Burgess, for recommending actual solutions that could work. As he said, the debate on the Second Amendment will continue for as long as this country is a country, but we need to protect our kids now. Mr. Lott, are there school districts where teachers and staff can be armed? Can you talk about that? And what are the results there? How many victims have we seen in those school districts?
Right. There are 20 states that have that allow teachers and staff to carry. You have some states like Utah and New Hampshire where anybody with a concealed carry permit who's a teacher or staff member is allowed to carry. Most other states require a vote either by the school district board or by a decision by the principal of the school. And it varies a lot across it. Some states like Oklahoma and Ohio have had 40% of the school districts with it, and Texas is over 30%. But what you have is we've had a couple decades of experience with these things, and there is not, from 2000 on, despite many thousands of school districts having armed teachers and staff, there has not been one attack where anybody's been wounded or killed at any of these schools. And the other thing is, when you read the legislative debate, when these laws get passed, there's all these concerns. Well, the teacher will leave the gun, or the teacher will get upset and accidentally shoot somebody, or they'll shoot a bystander or something like that. You cannot find any of the mistakes that they're concerned about. I know of a couple accidental discharges where nobody's been hurt, basically, as a result of them. But nobody has been shot by a teacher. Nobody's gotten a hold of a teacher's gun.
Well, there was a fucking kid shot by a damn resource officer just the other week.
So much of the debate about armed teachers, about things that
He's
might
supposed to be
possibly go wrong,
trained.
but we have thousands of schools and decades of experience to go and look to see whether or not those are likely outcomes or not.
I thank you. And Mr. Tiffany, I know you joined us remotely. Mr. Burgess would like some time. I'll yield back to you, Mr. Tiffany.
Thank you very much, and I yield to Burgess, to Representative Owens from Utah.
Thank you, Mr. Tiffany. I just want to, first of all, highlight once again how much we appreciate you guys being here. This is a conversation we need to have. You are the faces, you are the feelings, the empathy that we have to make sure we take care of our kids. If I can just highlight, let's separate the long-term conversation with what is immediate today. Every day we put our kids in a school system, our grandkids, we expect to be able to pick them up, that they're gonna be safe. That should never be a question. Our kids should never go to school wondering if they're gonna be safe or not. We can do that today. I just mentioned one of the bills. Think about this one. The school safety best practices. It's a database, a clearinghouse, where all the best practices throughout the country is put in one location, and schools, law enforcement agencies, institutions of higher learning, and public can access it. So everybody doesn't have to go through the same experience of getting to be the very best at protecting our kids.
Yeah, I'm
This
probably
was
gonna have to
turned
be on the
down by
phone
the
in a meeting
Democratic
here in a
Party.
little bit too.
What are we trying to, I guess the question is, what are we trying to accomplish? Do we want to make sure we just focus on the Second Amendment, or do we want to take care of our kids first? Let's get them off the table. Let's make sure they're not being used as hostages. They should be not part of this. We should never have this conversation ever again. If we take care of, rule number one, take care of our kids. I want to ask also something that my friend Jack Barrow said earlier. I grew up in a time when respect was being taught in the household. Back in the segregated days when my community led the country in the growth of middle class, men matriculated from college, men committed to marriage, we had more women getting married, Black women getting married than white women, because we respected that institution of marriage. Yes, if we want to get back to the core problem, let's make sure we're getting back to the family unit where these kids be raised right, where they understand discipline and respect. And if we start taking that off the table, guess what? Nothing we do here is going to change. Nothing. So I know that's kind of a spiritual thing that some people don't like to ever touch. I'm gonna tell you something, guys. This country is based on Judeo-Christian values. The reason we've been the greatest country in the history of mankind, the reason why I was able to be raised in a community I was raised in, a segregated community, and be so proud of this country, respect for my name and my family, because of that basic foundation, the 10 Commandments. So let's not take that off the table, because if we do, we're not gonna win this battle. Meanwhile, let's focus on our children first, and then we can have this other debate about Second Amendments anytime you want to, but they should not be part of this equation. Thank you, Ms. Tiffany. I'll yield back.
We have a member that is working very hard to, again, access technology. Ms. Bush. Bush of Missouri. Ms. Bush.
Oh, this ought to be a fun one. Corey Bush showing up. Bueller.
Thank the witnesses for their patience. We are trying to be courteous. We appreciate the time that you've spent with us. This is very, very important to us. So if you just give us a moment, and I will close the hearing with some responses as the prerogative of the chair.
Apparently, Corey Bush can't figure out.
Take this time
her phone
to submit into the record
or
articles, a partial list of asked unanimous consent.
But if this hearing is so
objection,
important, why
partial
isn't
list
she
of
in there
mass
in that
shootings in the
hearing
United
when-
States in 2022, New York Times. Sandy Hook survivor 17 tells her story for the first time since the tragedy 10 years ago. I thought I was going to die. Washington Post, they hope she was hiding in the Uvalde school. Instead, she was gone. In essence, she was dead. The Red City defund police problem. Large cities with Democratic mayors spend far more money on policing and hire far more police officers than large cities.
Because
with
they
Republican
have
mayors.
higher crime rates,
The
you
Red
hag.
State murder problem. I ask unanimous consent for all these articles to be submitted into the record without objection, so ordered.
Again, these are supposed to be lawmakers. Oh, it's Corey Bush, the one that they're looking for to get.
I have a unanimous consent request.
Absolutely. Mr. Massey?
This is from Shooting Sport News. It's an article called Attack on 2A Researcher Dr. John Lott Rebuffed by Defenders. This is in response to an accusation that his data has been debunked because it hasn't. So I'd like to submit that document.
Without objection, so ordered.
Yeah, John Lott's one. They can't argue with his data. They can name call him, but they can't argue with his data because he actually has factual data broken down. He's researched it. It's peer reviewed. That's all they have for the guys calling names.
Congressman Bush? Thank you. Congresswoman Bush?
St. Louis, and I thank you, Chairwoman, Madam Chairwoman, for holding.
We're ready to yield to you now for 5 minutes.
Are you able to, can you hear me?
I bet someone $5.
Thank
She
you so much
mentions
for
white
making the effort.
supremacy.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for holding this hearing. St. Louis is all too familiar with the daily drumbeat of gun violence that claims lives and leaves loved ones with empty chairs. Like Newtown and Uvalde, everyone in our community has been traumatized in some way by gun violence, especially young people. Today, I want to lift up two extraordinary young Black women from St. Louis who have borne the cost of gun violence. The first is Alexandria Bell, who was killed in a shooting at Central Visual and Performing Arts High School in October. Alexandria was 15. She loved art. She was an energetic and gifted dancer. She was always smiling, and she was a ray of sunshine to everyone who knew her. The other young woman I want to uplift is Veronica Russell, a senior at CVP. After this shooting, Veronica channeled her trauma and outrage into a brilliant letter detailing how Missouri's absurd gun laws are enabling more gun deaths. In that letter, she wrote that CVPA students are beyond hurt, beyond shocked, beyond traumatized. And she wrote that at CVPA, that sanctuary has been taken from us. It is devastating to think about the toll of gun violence in our country, especially on young people. Dr. Guerrero, as a medical provider who saw firsthand the consequences of the Uvalde shooting, what policies do you think are needed to address our students' mental health needs, whether they've survived the school shooting or just are terrified of ongoing, of going to school because they believe that they may not come home?
Well, first and foremost, I think that especially in the rural area like Uvalde is, accessibility, having the availability of those services for anyone that wants them. Could it be even like with dialing a number, how we have the national hotline now for suicide, something to that extent where someone can get the help they need without having to search for it. And also with somehow getting that help without having the stigma of reaching out for mental health on both ends of the problem.
Thank you. Ms. Melchano, thank you for sharing your story. Can you tell us more about what going to school in Newtown has been like for you and your classmates since the Sandy Hook shooting?
Newtown is an incredibly strong community. We're still fighting to this day. Recently, we've been pushing for an assault weapons ban. I, along with other members of Junior Newtown Action Alliance, we've been calling on Senator Schumer to push this bill up to the floor for a vote. It's something that's on Gen Z's priority list. We have been in the front lines of this issue for all we can remember. And we know that we're far from a perfect world and it's not realistic for every gun to be taken off of the streets, but that doesn't mean we can't do anything. And we just keep sitting here and watching all these shootings, and people are dying every day. And it's hard to watch Congress stand divided when the majority of Americans want change.
No, darling, I'm sorry.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing your story with us, and thank you for absolutely helping our country. Every life lost to gun violence, every moment spent in fear is both a moral failure and a policy failure. But the answer is not more incarceration. We're not going to prosecute our way out of this. That approach ends with Black and brown people being unfairly targeted. 81% of those convicted on federal gun charges in the Eastern District of Missouri are Black. So we understand that that's not going to solve. We understand it won't solve the gun violence epidemic. It will not save lives. Ultimately, we need to adopt a public health approach. We need like we just heard, common sense reforms, like requiring universal background checks, raising the age, enacting the red flag laws, and banning assault weapons. And we need to defeat the NRA and its cronies who profit off of flooding our streets with guns. Unfortunately, right now, we are at the mercy of an anti-democratic, anti-Black filibuster in the Senate and shameless Republicans who fill their campaign coffers with NRA blood money. But the fight goes on, and we will not rest until we have ended this crisis in St. Louis and in every other part of this country. Thank you, Madam Chair. And before I yield back, thank you.
Oh, she stopped herself. Yesterday, she was talking about white supremacy.
Congresswoman Bush is a trained nurse, and so I want to thank all of the health professionals who sadly have to confront this issue. As I indicated, I will take the prerogative of the chair to bring this hearing to close with a few points of inquiry that I wish to do. And as well, I will then raise the answer to the question that we started with, Uvalde, gun violence, and seeking bipartisan solutions. These witnesses traveled far. They sacrificed a lot. There are persons on this panel who survived violence, who lost loved ones to violence, who are suffering, who looked over patients, who lived this in Uvalde, and people who've come, who've given ideas from their heart. Let me first of all, to Mr. Heine, the holiday comes and you will not have your mother. I knew James Brady and his wife. They spent a lot of time on the Hill.
Yeah, they were people who wanted to ban all handguns.
Life.
And then somehow that turned into an assault weapons ban and 3-day waiting periods and a bunch of other shit.
Called him the bear, if we remember. Speech, his abilities were compromised. I believe the facts will say that he was shot with a .22. Mr. Heine, if in that episode on that day where our president survived, they had been hit point blank with an automatic assault weapon, only on the basis of your familiarity through the Brady group, what would you think?
I think it is clear it would likely be far more lethal. That event could have been far more lethal.
It would have been a whole lot less concealable too, jackass.
But your father, and you said there was a lot of work. If he had been point blank by an assault weapon, what might you expect?
We firmly believe that he would not be with us today.
Do you think between 1994 and 2004, you did your work where assault weapon incidences of mass murder down? Would you answer that question, please?
Absolutely.
Did you expand?
Yeah, if you look at research as recent as 2019,
you've got a
you
guy
can see that in that
sitting
10-year
mid-panel
period,
that
there were
already
significantly
described
less
this and
mass
has
shootings.
gone through the
In
data.
fact, as soon as that policy sunsetted, assault weapons, and because they were marketed as such, were flying off of the sales racks, and as a result, they were used in far more shootings, and those shootings were far more lethal. I think that it has been evident, and I think that you see it time and time again. The top 25 mass shootings the most lethal mass shootings in this nation's history have two things predominantly in common. Most were perpetrated with an assault weapon, and all but one were used high-capacity magazines. Those things are facts, and it's because these weapons do exactly what they were designed to do. They make it very easy to kill a lot of people in a short distance to keep your muzzle on target without muzzle creep coming in over a short period of time, which is why the military uses the same tactical features.
No, it's not.
You're reminding us, and that is, you said something about law enforcement officers, and as you well know, I clarified that this is not a statement. The vast numbers of law enforcement officers today, yesterday, and tomorrow that are on the streets of America. But you said something about what you are supposed to do when shots are fired, and particularly if you might come upon.
All right, guys, I got to shut this one here. I'm going to finish listening to this here while I'm on the road. I got to go pick my daughter up. I got a bunch of running around I got to do.
You know, it's 2 points to this.
So,
police officers are law enforcement.
you guys have
We
fun. I'm
understand
going to have to end this
we
one.
have an occupational hazard. We confront a
Peace
shooter
out, folks.
or situation. We know going into that we might not come out of that. The person who we're going after, the perpetrator or the one doing the assault, he's